Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Pamela Vitale. Pamela Vitale was born on January 11, 1953, at Shepherd Field Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, to U.S. Air Force Sergeant Vern B. Ludke, an accomplished pianist, and Carol J. Crowley Ludke, a vocalist and artist. Pamela spent most of her life in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with her family, including her sister Tamara. In her later years, Pamela worked as a flight attendant and visited various countries around the world. She met her first husband, Mario Vitale, in London, and then moved in with him. They had two children, Mario A. Vitale and Marissa A. Vitale. Despite appearances, their relationship was not the best from the very beginning. When it began to collapse, Pamela decided to return to the United States, taking her two children with her. In 1978, she moved to California in search of a better life. As a single mother, she could no longer work as a flight attendant for obvious reasons, so she tried her hand in various fields of activity. She worked as an accountant, a salesperson in a fashion boutique, and a manager in a computer company, but felt that none of these jobs were right for her. Nevertheless, Pamela continued to work to provide for herself and her children while also attending film school at the University of California. This path became more successful. Pamela enjoyed realizing herself in cinema, and eventually, she became a producer. Pamela's career took off during her third year of film school when she met her future second husband, Daniel Horowitz, who was a lawyer. He was a professional in his field, combining private practice with creative writing. Daniel wrote a script and saw great potential in it. He began looking for a producer who might be interested in his vision. His friend Tamara found out about the script and introduced them. Pamela became interested in the script, and thus a romance blossomed. A month later, she moved closer to him, and they began working together. Daniel and Pamela prospered financially. Thanks to Daniel's advocacy work, he gained popularity, which brought him many famous and wealthy clients. He frequently commented on high-profile criminal cases on television, even weighing in on the Michael Jackson case. Their inner circle knew Daniel and Pamela as happy people who sincerely loved each other, got along well. They seemed not just like spouses but also like best friends who understood each other perfectly. They had a bright future ahead of them. The next step they decided to take was to buy a big house together, unaware of how tragically their happiness could end. Around 6 p.m. on October 15, 2005, Daniel returned home after work. At that time, they lived in a prestigious area of a small town located approximately 30 kilometers from the city. Daniel had recently acquired a plot of land and moved in with his wife, while her children had already grown up and were living separately. Though they were a wealthy couple, they were living in a trailer because their dream home was still under construction. They were so close to realizing this dream that they were willing to endure any inconvenience. When Daniel returned home, he immediately noticed something odd. Pamela's car was near the trailer, although she should still have been at dance class. He initially brushed it off, thinking she had simply returned home early. Daniel took 2 bags of groceries and approached the trailer door, but froze in place as he saw a large stain of blood on the ground. His heart raced, but he tried to shake the thought away. However, when he opened the door and went inside, he found his wife on the floor in a fetal position, covered in blood. Daniel knew how to provide first aid, so he leaned over her body to turn her over. In that moment, he realized she was dead. She was cold to the touch and clearly had died several hours prior. Rigor mortis had already set in. He called emergency services and reported the incident. After hanging up, he leaned over his wife's body again and screamed so loudly that neighbors all over the area heard his heartbreaking cries. On the morning of the tragedy, apparently, someone had come in early that morning. Pamela opened the door, which led to an altercation. She managed to push a large TV toward her attacker, probably trying to defend herself, leaving traces of her bloody hands on it. Pamela desperately fought for her life. A mix of her blood and the attacker's was found on the floor. Particles of skin from the murderer were found under her fingernails. Despite her desperate resistance, Pamela was brutally beaten to death. The forensic examination revealed that Pamela had a broken nose and several knocked, out teeth. She was killed by blunt force trauma to the head, which caused massive hemorrhaging in her brain. The attack was so brutal that portions of her scalp were torn off, and there were fractures on her skull. The attackers even inflicted wounds on her stomach and left a symbol on her back that looked like the letter H. It appeared that the attacker had spent considerable time in the trailer with Pamela. The detectives discovered that someone had taken the water and bathed, leaving behind smeared blood. It was possible that some of the cuts on Pamela were inflicted after her death. Naturally, detectives first suspected Daniel himself, as this crime was committed with extreme cruelty. In such cases, it is often found that the guilty party is a close person with a motive. In any case, Daniel had a reliable alibi. Several people could vouch for him that day. It was a usual day for a lawyer. He left the house around 8 a.m. and did not return until 6 p.m. The high-profile murder of a famous female producer attracted wide media attention, and this case was actively covered on television. Numerous rumors immediately began to circulate. It was about a prosperous, developing area with wealthy residents, where such a massacre of an innocent person was least expected. The local community wanted to know the truth before the next attack happened. It was necessary to stop the bloodthirsty criminal. Pamela was found in her underwear. Here were no traces of a break-in, which confirmed their suspicions. Only a husband or lover came to mind. There was no evidence of abuse, and nothing was missing from the trailer, despite the fact that the wealthy couple had a lot of valuables inside. This meant that theories involving abuse or robbery were unlikely. Nevertheless, even after the alibi was confirmed, the rumors did not stop. Some speculated that Daniel could not have committed the crime himself. As a lawyer, he constantly communicated with potentially dangerous people who could easily have carried out something similar at his behest. Detectives carefully checked this theory, analyzing the data on his computer and phone. However, they found no grounds for suspicion against Daniel and could not confirm that Pamela had a lover. Nevertheless, law enforcement officials did not abandon the idea that the criminal must have been well acquainted with Pamela. He was probably a resident of the area. This theory was not without foundation, as a statement was found in a trailer indicating harassment. According to Daniel, they had been persecuted for quite some time. As a result, he even left a restraining order against one of their neighbors to Pamela, but he never filed the documents with the court. Daniel admitted that there had been difficulties with one local resident who did not like them. However, he managed to reach an agreement with this person after weeks of bickering, and the problems ended without filing a complaint. He kept the restraining order just in case something happened again. The check on this neighbor yielded no results, as he was away at the time of the attack and had a reliable alibi. He was subsequently excluded from the list of suspects. On the day Pamela was buried, a press conference was held, during which the police announced the arrest of the probable killer. It turned out to be a 16-year-old teenager named Scott Dileski, who was just 2 weeks away from his 17th birthday. He did not personally know Pamela's family, but the victim's husband, Daniel, had helped his mother, Esther Fielding, with paperwork. Scott's family was experiencing financial difficulties, so Daniel did not even take money for his assistance. This was the unexpected price for his kindness. Scott Dileski was born in San Francisco. Soon after his birth, his parents divorced, and Esther raised the boy. Quite quickly, she found a new partner and remarried. Scott claimed that his stepfather could be cruel, but his mother had never witnessed any such incidents. Information about the early years of his life is contradictory. Some claim his stepfather could indeed be cruel, while others deny it. There is also conflicting information about the mother's attitude towards her son. Despite the difficulties with the family, when his father offered for him to move in, Scott refused. Shortly before Pamela's murder, Esther got divorced again, leading to financial problems and an acute housing crisis. She and her son were left without a place to stay, and Esther desperately sought employment. But finding a job while dealing with housing issues proved difficult. Fortunately, friends extended a helping hand, offering to temporarily move in with them. Esther and Scott were offered to settle on a property in a trailer. In fact, the living conditions were modest, but they had no choice. During this period, Scott was going through a transitional phase, showing signs of rebelliousness. As a pleasant but peculiar young man, he had previously been a Boy Scout and a baseball player. Before moving, he had studied quite well. Coincidentally, a chain of tragic events had been triggered by the loss of a loved one. Shortly before the move, Scott's half-sister died in a car accident. This serious incident caused significant psychological distress for him. Many believe that his mother's indifference led to negative changes in his behavior, but she did not remain idle. She tried to support her family during that time. Scott became increasingly detached from society and closed off, exhibiting low energy. His behavior also took on some strange characteristics. For instance, he once drew a pentagram and danced around it. This was only an external manifestation of his problems, while those who constantly interacted with Scott did not notice any significant alarming changes in his behavior. He became increasingly immersed in dark thoughts and began to write disturbing poems, probably to attract his mother's attention. Esther was sure that her son simply exhibited quirks. She did not speak of him as a difficult child. She believed that Scott was going through a challenging period in his own way due to the death of his sister and the financial difficulties their family faced. Esther remembered how he previously could not even stand the sight of blood, but when the police first spoke to him, he claimed that at the age of 12, he had tried various illegal substances. Gradually, Scott showed an increasing interest in crime. He read a lot about serial killers and school shootings, spoke more often about these topics, showing an unhealthy fascination. Friends noticed that he was becoming increasingly distant. When detectives looked at Scott's computer, even more questions arose. They found very disturbing content, particularly concerning the practice of cutting up animals. One of Scott's friends, whom he met after the move, said that not long before Pamela's murder, they had decided to sell a truck, viewing it as the only way to improve their lives financially. The teenagers needed money. A solution was found quickly. They lived in a wealthy area, so they decided to put in some effort to earn the necessary amount. Scott, whose demeanor was becoming increasingly gloomy, decided to take the path of crime and rob a house, launching another chain of alarming events. Shortly before Pamela's death, a woman named Karen contacted the police, noting that a purchase she did not make had been charged to her credit card. An order from an online store was delivered to a nearby house where Esther and Scott lived. Someone from this household had purchased special lighting equipment for growing illegal plants. All of this led to Esther, as it was under her name that the suspicious order was made. However, Karen did not want to contact the police immediately. Esther was outraged by what she perceived as slander and believed that they were trying to put her in a bad light. Esther denied that she had ordered anything similar on the internet. However, the property owners suspected something was wrong and checked Scott's computer. Under pressure, Scott quickly confessed that he had come up with a fraudulent plan involving credit cards and that he had ordered the lighting fixtures. Soon after, Pamela died. In response to this incident, the parents of Scott's accomplice pressured him to confess to the scam, fearing that the young people could be involved in much more serious offenses. Maybe, the fraud involving the credit cards led to a robbery that ended in murder. His parents insisted that the accomplice go to the police station and confess everything. Interestingly, when he left the interrogation room, the detectives had in their hands a story that Scott had killed his neighbor. The young man who testified about all of this received immunity from prosecution for providing testimony. It was he who had pushed Scott into fraud and suggested that he engage in illegal activities. When the police came to arrest Scott, he was not at home. Esther was detained and admitted that her son was at a nearby location with his girlfriend. Less than an hour later, he was arrested along with Esther, who was also considered a participant. Esther and her son were held in custody for destruction of evidence and possibly for murder. Bail for Esther was set at $500. The suspicion against her arose from the story about a backpack that contained details of accounts and numbers of people from whom Scott had stolen money or planned to steal. Several people had already suffered due to the swindler. Esther's actions were viewed as criminal. The night after Pamela's murder, she contacted Scott to inform him of police activity in their area and asked him not to come home. Scott told her about the records and the backpack containing the data, asking her to throw it away, which she did. Esther insisted she was simply afraid for her son's safety. Scott was with his girlfriend, named Jenna Reddy. She later also ended up at the station, even testified against her boyfriend at the trial. She stated that he often talked about different ways of killing, for example, that shooting a person is less painful than beating them to death with a bat or stabbing them with a knife. According to Jenna, Scott often wondered how long it takes to beat someone to death and was obsessed with this topic. After the crime against Pamela, when they pressured Esther, she quickly agreed to cooperate with the authorities, receiving guarantees for protection from criminal prosecution. She denied any connection to her neighbor's murder. However, opinions about Esther were very conflicting. Some believed that she lived for her son, while her ex-husband did not share this belief. In any case, Esther changed her testimony, clearly trying to justify herself. Mainly, Esther talked about the backpack that she had thrown away. She did not know all the contents but believed they were unrelated to the murder. There was data on all the people who had become victims of Scott's fraudulent scheme. Esther helped find some items they had tried to destroy, including shoes and gloves that had blood stains on them. An examination showed that the items contained the blood of Pamela. Scott also left a shoe imprint at the crime scene, and samples of his DNA were found on Pamela's foot. In Scott's room, handwritten notes were discovered, some of which contained information about accounts of people who were likely to have been deceived by the same fraudulent scheme. In addition, there were plans to kidnap people. Apparently, Scott was ready to make money by any means, regardless of the seriousness of the crimes. There were also descriptions of how to get rid of evidence. All this confirmed the guilt of him. There were many coincidences. Even the symbol carved on the back of Pamela resembled the signatures that Scott used. A public defender was appointed at the beginning of the trial. However, there was also strong evidence against Scott that came to court. He was the complete opposite of his Gothic image during the investigation. All this was part of the defense attorney's strategy to humanize a dangerous killer in front of the jury in order to acquit him. According to Scott's version of events told before the trial, on the day of the murder, he decided to take a walk towards a local waterfall. He returned from this walk with serious injuries. According to him, while he was walking, he accidentally met a strange woman who attacked him, resulting in his injuries. By an amazing coincidence, she was Pamela, so the blood stains on both her and his clothes matched the DNA of the victim. He claimed that she had clawed his face, cut his wrist, and injured his hand. When he was arrested, the injuries were still fresh. Naturally, his story sounded unrealistic. Why would Pamela attack Scott at the waterfall? What happened to her afterward? How she ended up in the house? And who attacked her were all major questions. The evidence against Scott included all his browser queries related to animal cruelty, his obsession with crimes, plans for murder, material evidence, blood on items, confessions from friends of his girlfriend and her mother. The lawyer tried to highlight his best qualities and described him as a decent guy, but against the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecutor's office, it seemed futile. The only point that might have raised doubt, as stated by the lawyer, was the discovery of DNA samples. In addition to Scott's and Pamela's blood, traces of an unidentified person were found in the house. The defense attorney insisted that the detectives overlooked this evidence from the start and focused solely on proving Scott's guilt. The prosecution argued that the evidence against Scott was too substantial to be dismissed, while the evidence suggesting Scott's innocence was virtually insignificant. The jury went into deliberation to decide Scott's fate. It took them 18 hours to reach a decision, ultimately sparing him from the death penalty, as they chose to try him as a minor. It was assumed that he would serve the rest of his life in prison. Scott was found guilty of first-degree murder a month before the final round of hearings was held. Pamela's husband took the stand and stated that in his many years as a lawyer, he had represented at least 50 different murderers but had never seen a total lack of remorse like Scott's. Daniel believed that Scott had no redeeming qualities that would allow for parole eligibility. He deserved to be in prison for the rest of his life, and so it happened. Scott Dileski was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was to remain in a juvenile facility until he turned 18 and then be transferred to an adult prison. Immediately after Scott turned 18, he appealed to have his sentence reviewed, but his efforts were in vain. In 2009, Scott filed a claim that his rights had been violated. He wanted to change the venue of the hearing and claimed that some evidence which could refute the appeal was also rejected. The next attempt was made in 2011, where he pointed to evidence indicating the involvement of an unknown person in the murder, specifically claiming that the authorities did not even attempt to identify who owned all the DNA traces found in the trailer where Pamela died. He insisted that the nature of the crime indicated a personal motive. Scott himself allegedly did not know Pamela, and it made no sense for him to kill her, especially with such cruelty. Additionally, the detectives claimed that the criminal remained in the trailer for an extended period, consistent with the timeline, but Scott asserted that he had been at home during that time. Again, his arguments did not lead to any significant changes. Another appeal was filed in 2016, with Scott insisting that his life sentence was wrongful because he was a minor at the time of the crime. The appeal was accepted for consideration. During his imprisonment, state laws were revised to prohibit life sentences for minors without the possibility of parole, and he was automatically given the opportunity for early release after serving 25 years in prison. In 2030, Scott will have the chance to present his case for release. However, whether this release will be approved by the Commission remains uncertain. It is difficult to predict the outcome, but it is known that Scott became an exemplary prisoner. He did not drop out of school and continued to receive an education within the prison walls. Pamela's family stated that they would definitely be present at the parole board hearing to prevent him from being released, viewing him as an especially dangerous criminal. Daniel never finished building the house he dreamed of with his wife. He was forced to sell the land along with the partially built house because he simply wanted to forget everything that had happened and start life anew. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Jasmine Pace. Jasmine Pace, a 22-year-old college student, planned to spend Thanksgiving 2022 with her family. However, her plans suddenly changed, leaving her mother surprised. At the last moment, she sent a message canceling the family gathering. Shortly afterward, a new post appeared on Jasmine's Facebook page that read, "Enjoy Thanksgiving with my baby," accompanied by a photo that raised concerns. Initially confused, her family's concern quickly escalated into panic when they realized something was wrong. Jasmine was missing, and someone seemed to be impersonating her online. On the night of November 22, 2022, Jasmine drove a white Chevy Equinox away from her home in Chattanooga, Tennessee, at approximately 11:30 p.m. Later, her mother, Katrina Bean, received a text from Jasmine's phone stating that she would spend the rest of the week at her friend Emma's house. Since Jasmine was grieving the recent loss of her grandmother to cancer, her decision to skip the family gathering didn't immediately alarm her loved ones. She often withdrew for short periods to cope with her emotions. But everything took a troubling turn when Jasmine made a Facebook post. The post featured Jasmine in an uncharacteristically revealing outfit, which surprised her mother. What alarmed her father, Travis Pace, was even more troubling. Jasmine's extensive tattoos were missing from the photo. Each tattoo represented a timeline in her life, added months apart, creating a distinctive pattern, especially on her right arm. The glaring absence of these tattoos confirmed the post was fake, and Jasmine's family realized the situation was far worse than they had imagined. Katrina reached out to Jasmine's friend Emma and confirmed what she had suspected. Jasmine had been missing from her family for a week, contradicting the claims in a recent message. Several other friends and family members had also received suspicious messages supposedly from Jasmine, all of which raised concerns. The family immediately began searching for her. Jasmine's SUV, equipped with a GPS feature from the My Chevrolet app, allowed her mother to track its location. The car was found parked outside a building on Mountain Creek Road in Chattanooga. By the time it was discovered, it was 8:30 p.m. on November 26th, 4 days after Jasmine was last seen leaving her mother's house late on the evening of the 22nd. The area where the car was located was unfamiliar to the family, and as far as they knew, Jasmine didn't know anyone there. When they approached the car, they noticed that the driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that someone much taller than the petite Jasmine had been driving. The family contacted the police, who arrived on the scene and filed a report describing the situation. Katrina also reached out to the family's cell phone provider. Since Jasmine was part of their family plan, her mother, Katrina, had access to her phone records. The records revealed that there had been no calls from Jasmine's phone for several days. In the presence of the police, Katrina began calling the numbers listed in the call log. One number stood out, a call with someone Jasmine had spoken to for over an hour on the night of the 22nd. When Katrina dialed that number, it connected to a young man named Jason, whom Jasmine had recently met on a dating app. Jason, a computer science student at a university in Chattanooga, had been casually dating Jasmine for a few months. Their relationship was not serious, so Jasmine never introduced him to her parents, Katrina and Travis, who didn't know him. When Jasmine was reported missing, Jason claimed he hadn't heard from her in several days and that their last conversation had been brief. However, Katrina found his behavior suspicious and felt he might be lying. His apparent lack of concern further alarmed her. Despite Katrina urging the police to dig deeper, they refused, arguing that Jasmine was an adult and there was no clear evidence of foul play. Determined to find their daughter, Katrina and Travis began knocking on doors throughout the apartment complex on Mountain Creek Road. Unfortunately, no neighbors had seen Jasmine. They sought help from the apartment guard, who provided security camera footage. The video showed a white Chevrolet entering the parking lot. By cross-referencing this footage with timestamps from the My Chevrolet app, they pinpointed the general time frame but couldn't identify the driver. Katrina then noticed an unread text message from Jasmine, sent on November 23rd. The message included a location and timestamp, showing Jasmine's device had been at a specific place at 2:18 a.m. This was highly unusual, as Jasmine had never sent such cryptic messages, especially during the night. Acting quickly, Katrina and Travis went straight to the address mentioned in the message. Jasmine's parents, Katrina and Travis, knocked on every door in the building, paying particular attention to room 210. Neighbors mentioned hearing a loud noise from that unit around 2:15 a.m. on November 23rd. Upon investigation, Katrina and Travis quickly discovered that the tenant of the apartment was Jason. The unit was quite small, consisting of a kitchenette near the sofa, a hallway leading to the bedroom, and a single bathroom. From the front door, they could see a small duffel bag filled with cleaning supplies sitting on the kitchen table. While searching, Travis found Jasmine's driver's license and credit cards in a drawer. They called the police again, but after speaking with Katrina and the neighbors, the officers left, citing a lack of immediate evidence of foul play. Frustrated by the lack of action, Katrina went back to the apartment several times over the next few hours. She collected items like laptops, electronics, cell phones, a camera, and an iPad, anything that might offer clues to her daughter's whereabouts. She and Travis also searched the trash cans outside the building. Nearly at midnight, the police finally returned to room 210 with a search warrant and officially began their investigation. During the inspection, they observed suspicious stains resembling blood in multiple areas, on the wooden floor in the living room, the linoleum in the bathroom, and the carpet in the bedroom. They also discovered blood stains on the bathroom doors and walls. The substantial amount of cleaning supplies found in the apartment further heightened suspicions. At the scene, police seized a pair of white sneakers and blue pants for further investigation. In the living room, broken glass fragments hinted at a possible violent altercation. In the bedroom, the furniture appeared to have been moved, suggesting attempts to conceal signs of a struggle. This discovery led investigators to focus more intently on piecing together the unsettling clues surrounding Jasmine's disappearance. In some parts of the apartment, it was evident that furniture had been rearranged to hide evidence. A kitchen knife was found on the bed, and stains that could potentially be blood were present in nearly every room. A forensic team was brought in to apply a specialized solution designed to detect traces of blood. The investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Detectives obtained CCTV footage from the apartment building and nearby areas to construct a timeline of Jason Chen's movements, hoping it would lead to locating Jasmine Pace. Investigators confirmed that Jasmine arrived at 110 Tremont before midnight on November 22. Her Chevrolet was seen entering the building's parking lot and later leaving, with investigators tracking the vehicle to the apartment complex where Jason lived. The day after her arrival, Jasmine was recorded leaving the building, wearing a hoodie. A surveillance camera at the apartment's entrance captured Jason leaving multiple times, including at 7:30 p.m. Just 3 minutes later, someone in a light-colored sweatshirt was seen driving Jasmine's SUV to the Signal View condo, where the vehicle was abandoned. On November 23, 2022, Jason took several suspicious trips. In the morning, he went to Walmart and purchased hydrogen peroxide, cleaning supplies, and a pair of white sneakers, which were clearly visible on the store's surveillance footage. These sneakers were later found discarded in a trash can near the apartment complex. That evening, Jason visited Ugrand to buy a pack of paper towels. Between the Walmart trip and disposing of some clothes, investigators believe Jason was attempting to conceal evidence. His movements were monitored through various surveillance videos across Chattanooga, where his distinctive white sweatshirt made him easily identifiable even in blurry footage. Around 6 p.m. on the 23rd, a man in a white sweatshirt was filmed struggling to move a large suitcase from the apartment entrance to the parking lot. Shortly afterward, Jason's black Toyota Camry was seen driving away. On November 29th, a week after Jasmine's disappearance, Jason was found at his parents' home. The arresting officers in Nolanville observed cuts on Jason's arms and legs, suggesting a violent encounter. A search warrant was issued for the home, resulting in the seizure of a black backpack and handwritten notes from the room Jason had been staying in. The notes appeared to show him trying to construct his version of the incident. Detectives discovered Jason had last seen Jasmine on November 19th, according to notes he made. He claimed they had spoken and mentioned that Jasmine struggled with mental health issues. Jason seemingly prepared for his eventual questioning by portraying Jasmine as homeless. During a search of Jason's backpack, detectives found his phone and a SIM card removed from Jasmine's phone. Upon examining Jason's phone, investigators recovered a photo of Jasmine standing in his bathroom on the night she disappeared. They also found screenshots of text messages from Jasmine, though the content of the messages was missing. The morning following Jasmine's apparent death, Jason sent her a photo captioned, "Slept like a baby," followed by a text later that day saying, "We'll meet again tonight." Metadata revealed the photo had been taken 2 years earlier. Jasmine's phone records showed she visited Walmart with Jason on the morning she disappeared, but surveillance footage only captured Jason shopping alone. Investigators traced Jason's movements, revealing that he loaded a large suitcase into his Toyota Camry and drove to Suck Creek Road near the riverbank. On December 1st, Thursday, investigators found a suitcase along the riverbank. It belonged to Jason and contained Jasmine's body. She was wrapped in 3 garbage bags and restrained with handcuffs. Her right hand was cuffed to her right ankle, while her left ankle was cuffed to her right elbow. The handcuffs were basic models, not police issue, with one chain broken. An autopsy confirmed Jasmine had been fatally attacked, with the bullet concentrated in a single area of her body. In December 2022, Jason Chen's bail was set at $5 million, sparking outrage due to the disturbing details of Jasmine's murder. Many believed he shouldn't have been offered bail at all. Evidence revealed that Jason had accessed Jasmine's phone and SIM card to manage her bank account and post fake messages after her death. During his opening statement on the first day of court proceedings, lawyer Josh Weiss did not claim his client's innocence. He acknowledged that Jason killed Jasmine but argued that it was unintentional. The prosecution did not pursue the death penalty. If convicted of first-degree murder, Jason faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. His best chance for a lighter sentence would be to plead to a lesser charge, such as manslaughter. To do this, the defense aimed to convince the jury that Jason killed Jasmine in a moment of passion, having been provoked into an extreme emotional reaction that resulted in her death. The defense's arguments suggested that they had been drinking wine late at night at Jason's home, and that Jasmine had gone to the kitchen to get water. While there, She allegedly heard constant notifications from a dating app on Jason's phone. This led to an argument between the two, during which Jasmine reportedly attacked Jason with a broken wine glass. Jason, who had earlier taken a kitchen knife to his bedroom to open a bottle of wine, used the knife during the struggle. The defense explained the stains on Jasmine's body as part of an incident that occurred after the attack. They claimed Jason panicked after the attack and handcuffed Jasmine to fit her into a suitcase. Video recordings from Jason and Jasmine's phones, along with testimony from neighbors, provided a timeline of the murder and Jason's attempts to cover it up. Neighbor Courtney Brewer testified to hearing an argument after 2 a.m. The reconstruction of the murder relied heavily on the physical evidence found at the crime scene, but this is where the case became complicated. Police applied a chemical to various items at the crime scene, including a broken knife. Katrina inspected and searched the crime scene. The defense later called its expert to highlight significant changes observed between the initial police response and the scene's documentation. Furniture had been moved, and questions arose about whether certain items were relevant evidence. Travis testified that, when he initially entered the room with Katrina to find their daughter, he didn't see a knife on the bed. The medical examiner determined the attack was deliberate and found no suspicious evidence contradicting this conclusion. Based on the location of the wounds, Jasmine was likely in a fetal position during the assault. The handcuffs she wore were most likely applied while she was still alive. Additionally, the medical examiner found no alcohol in her system, which contradicted Jason's claim that they had been drinking wine. Jason's argument that Jasmine provoked him by becoming angry over dating app notifications was proven false. A state expert reviewed the app's data and confirmed no notifications were received. Jason chose not to testify in his defense. Evidence was presented quickly. Jason's lawyer withdrew support for his initial story, instead highlighting the absence of handcuff marks on Jasmine's wrists, which would have been visible if she had been alive when restrained. The presence of handcuffs suggested that the attack was premeditated. The number of wounds indicated that Jason had sufficient time to think through and carry out the assault. During closing arguments, prosecutor Cody Vamp outlined the sequence of events, including Courtney Brewer hearing someone running to the apartment door at 2 a.m. The jury began deliberating after the final arguments and delivered a verdict shortly afterward. One juror confirmed that the repeated visits by Jasmine Pace's family to the crime scene did not influence their decision. At the sentencing phase, jurors had to decide whether Jason Chen should ever be eligible for parole. Jason's attorney appealed to the jury, asking them to grant his client a chance for redemption. However, the jury deliberated for less than an hour and ultimately convicted Jason Chen of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Following the conviction, Jasmine Pace's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Jason Chen's parents. They accused the parents of harboring Jason, giving him money, and sharing information during the days after the murder while he was the prime suspect and their daughter was still missing. The loss of Jasmine and the ensuing legal battles deeply affected the Pace family. After the sentencing, the trials surrounding Jason Chen, referred to by the family as a monster, were marked by overwhelming grief. Prosecutors condemned his crime as heinous, cruel, and inhumane. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Sweppel family. Stephen Sweppel graduated from a local university in the 80s with a degree in business and planned to build his finances during his studies. He worked various jobs, including as a bartender and lifeguard, but he always remained modest. When Stephen met Cheryl, they got to know each other, and the lovers became inseparable. Thus began a relationship in which they complemented each other excellently. At university, she was very smart and loved working with children, therefore, she became a social studies teacher, actively participating in everything from book and religious gatherings to various events with her beloved. Some time later, they got married. It seemed like a perfect union, destined to last forever. After several unsuccessful attempts to have children, Cheryl decided not to take any risks. As a result, they decided to adopt. Cheryl has adopted 4 children into her family, which was a thrilling experience for her, as she had always wanted to be a mother for those who needed it during their childhood. In the large house where they lived, Ethan, the eldest of all the adopted children, was born in 1998. They liked him very much because he was greatly interested in everything. He was showing energy that they appreciated for the sake of the family. Their fourth child, Eleanor, was born in 2005. She was the youngest of them all. Events brought a stable income, therefore, their family was always filled with warmth and harmony. This is not a classic story of career success. Cheryl left her school job after more than a decade, allowing her to spend more time with her children. She regularly started visiting her children's parents and grandparents, who lived a few kilometers away. They became local celebrities. A wealthy family adopting 4 children took on real parental roles. They wanted to give their growing generation as much as possible. In February 2008, everything turned upside down. The bank found itself in danger due to an incident involving the theft of over $500,000. Investigative organizations that were involved dismissed Stephen. But that was not the end. The investigation lasted longer than necessary to maintain its progress since there was no overwhelming evidence of his involvement. Ultimately, it was revealed that his position was affected by the economic crisis in 2007, related to problems in the mortgage market and over-indebtedness. Stephen sought to create a financial cushion that was plausible, as he was hard at work during that period. In a constant state of stress, a person is prone to making mistakes. New information reveals that throughout this time, they were indeed becoming the center of public attention, as the waste of such an amount appeared to be a source of sensational news regarding involvement in financial crime. Stephen lived under significant, constant pressure, especially from Cheryl, which irritated him. Totaling $559,040 over 7 years, was also reported. Stephen has pleaded not guilty, but has indicated to investigators that he did indeed transfer the money into a personal account. Like Cheryl, others did not understand that real problems had begun, which posed a significant issue for the family. More information on the 2008 financial crimes indicated that bail was set to remain free, scheduled for April 21st of the same year. In the event of a guilty plea for the serious crime, the minimum sentence would range from 3 to 5 years, after which a possibility might arise. A significant blow followed, not only to Stephen's reputation but also to their relationships in America. Sweppel family began to collapse, and they often struggled with the consequences. A true storm from the outside awaited them. However, they remained sociable and polite, despite the stress and mental disturbances that could affect future events. On Sunday morning, the Sweppel family attended Easter Mass at St. Mary's Catholic Church. Stephen and Cheryl's parents were also present at the Mass and later said they did not notice anything unusual about anyone's behavior. That evening, a family friend stopped by the Sweppels' home to check on Stephen. The friend saw one of the children, but saw nothing unusual. In fact, a terrible tragedy occurred. On March 23, 2008 morning at 6:31 a.m., Sweppel called 911 from his cell phone, asking for police to come to his home immediately and hanging up without giving his name. When police arrived at his home, they found Sweppel's wife, Cheryl, and their 4 adopted children, Ethan, 10, Seth, 9, Mira, 5, and Eleanor, 3, dead from multiple blunt force injuries to the upper body and head. Police recovered the alleged murder weapons, 2 baseball bats, at the scene. According to forensic experts, at the time of her death, Cheryl was around 30 years old and likely died around at 11:30 p.m. At the same time as Sweppel left a series of voice messages apologizing to former colleagues and relatives. Stephen Sweppel left a note for his father and brother at their law firm. In the note, he said his family was in heaven. According to Stephen, they were doomed to humiliation, and inevitably, he would end up in prison. According to the letter Stephen wrote, he gathered his 4 children into the family van parked in the garage and attempted to kill them then himself with carbon monoxide poisoning. When that didn't work, Stephen took the children back into the house and beat them to death. The 3 oldest children were found in their bedrooms. Eleanor, the youngest, was found downstairs in the playroom. Investigators soon uncovered that Stephen had murdered their entire family, revealing that reliable information was scarce. Cheryl was probably killed during the initial attempt to cover up the crime using carbon monoxide poisoning. Nevertheless, he lacked the courage to take his own life and refused to surrender. In the face of his wife's and children's horrific death, he can't separate death from life. Approximately at 6:36 a.m., unsuccessful attempts became more evident when Sweppel died in a tragic crash on Interstate 80 outside Iowa City. Witnesses said the driver was speeding and appeared to intentionally hit a concrete pillar. There were virtually no signs of slowing down at 100 kilometers per hour. Upon impact, the car overturned. They discovered a badly charred body, from which identification was initially impossible. The community reported that the threat was gone, not ignoring the risk that he may have orchestrated his death to evade justice. The charred remains were identified using dental records, to everyone's relief amidst the horrifying events now unfolding. It was hard to comprehend that they had been a respectable family, even if a bit of alcohol mixed with substances had been a fabrication that no one could believe or confirm. His loved ones often felt overwhelming sorrow. The event struck the entire community hard, as their lives had been brutally cut short. Stephen was not just a son-in-law to them, but a beloved son, and they sincerely mourned his death. On March 24th, their youngest child was to turn 3 years old. The term annihilator describes a phenomenon where a person kills their entire family. In this case, committing took his own life was akin to this situation. In 68% of cases involving family annihilators, they often kill to spare their loved ones from future suffering. Decent family men may seem like role models for family life, even if they begin to exhibit violent tendencies. The fact that Cheryl decided to return to work might have weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, the mystery of the $500,000 stolen from the bank remains unsolved. Some believe everything is connected to the house that remained after settling the mortgage before going to court. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bill Mowbray. Bill Mowbray lived in Brownsville, Texas, USA, in 1987. He was a decent and loving man who was married to Susie. This was his second marriage. From his first marriage, Bill had a daughter named Christine, who lived with her mother. When Susie met Bill, she was also divorced and had brought her 2 children to live with them. Over the past 9 years, they have built a happy family together. They were only 4 years apart in age and shared many things in common. Despite Susie's eccentric personality, Bill thought of her as the ideal wife. Bill was dedicated not only to his family but also to his career. After attending college, he began working in car sales and eventually transformed into a prominent businessman. By 1987, he had successfully managed Mal Motors, a Cadillac dealership in Brownsville, for 13 years. Susie actively supported his work, often visiting the dealership and even appearing in commercials broadcast across the city. Their success brought them considerable wealth, making them local celebrities regularly seen on TV. The family enjoyed traveling and owned a large mansion in Brownsville, 2 beachfront villas, and several luxury cars. On the surface, their life appeared enviable, but in reality, it was far less glamorous. In recent years, Bill's business had struggled, with the dealership stagnating and showing no signs of growth. Bill realized he was sinking deeper into debt because his expenses far exceeded his income. Despite facing financial difficulties, they upheld an image of wealth and continued to spend lavishly. As their money problems worsened, it became evident they were facing a serious financial crisis. By 1987, the situation had also severely impacted Bill's mental health. He began suffering from depression and often voiced that ending his own life might be the only way to escape their predicament. For Susie, this was an extremely difficult time. Her husband had never spoken or behaved this way before, and she feared he might do something drastic. His relatives were equally concerned for his well-being. They arranged consultations with a psychotherapist in the hopes of helping him, but their efforts yielded little progress. Bill remained firm in his belief that their family urgently needed money, otherwise, the business would collapse, leaving them on the verge of poverty. A solution to their financial struggles seemed nowhere in sight. Facing the threat of bankruptcy, Susie and Bill ultimately believed their best hope lay in securing a new loan from the bank. On September 15, 1987, Susie, 39, and Bill, 43, called to wish Susie's son a happy 16th birthday. At the time, her son and daughter were visiting their father. The conversation was warm and enjoyable, and everything seemed normal. Later that evening, Susie and Bill watched a TV show together before heading to bed. In the early hours of the morning, around 2:15 a.m., Susie woke up to the terrifying scene of her husband holding a weapon pointed at his own head. Before she could react, he pulled the trigger, using his right hand while lying on his side. Shocked and terrified, Susie called out to him, but he didn't respond. Blood rapidly soaked the bed, and with mounting horror, she realized the gravity of his injury. Panicked, she rushed to the home phone to seek help but accidentally dialed the number of her work partner, Bill Luke Roy, instead of emergency services. Susie told Luke what had happened and confessed she didn't know what to do. Luke immediately urged her to call 911. She followed the advice and called the emergency services. However, she had already lost precious minutes, which forced the ambulance to set off immediately. When the ambulance crew arrived at the scene, they found Susie outside the house, standing calmly with a cigarette in one hand and a drink in the other. Showing no signs of distress, she led the paramedics inside and gestured toward the bedroom without entering it. Inside, Bill was lying on the bed, still alive but in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital, where he later passed away. The cause of death was clear: a weapon injury to the head. Beside him lay a weapon in a pool of blood. Initially, investigators suspected that he had harmed himself, but they decided to carry out a more thorough investigation before reaching any conclusions. Forensic experts began analyzing the scene. The unusually large volume of blood warranted a detailed investigation. Blood spatters were found on much of the furniture, on the wall near the bed, and even on the ceiling fan. Fortunately, a blood spatter expert was brought in to assist. The expert confirmed that Bill had died from a single wound to the head. The only fingerprints found on the weapon during testing were Bill's. Susie has consistently maintained her perspective on the story since the beginning, asserting that Bill suffered from prolonged depression, had a tendency to harm himself, and had expressed these thoughts to multiple people on several occasions. Some of her statements were corroborated by her relatives and friends, as well as Bill's. Bill, a businessman, had been facing mounting challenges in managing his dealership, which seemed to have worsened his mental health. However, Susie's behavior raised significant doubts. She does not seem to be a grieving widow. Instead, she discusses her husband's death calmly, as though it were merely a trivial matter. Still, this wasn't the primary reason investigators began to scrutinize her further. The most shocking detail emerged in the 12 hours following Bill's death. During this time, Jim, Bill's brother, arrived at Bill's residence intending to speak with Susie, offer her support, and try to piece together what had happened by observing the scene. To his surprise, when Jim went upstairs, he heard music and the laughter of women. When he knocked, Susie came out casually and explained that she was hosting a party with friends. Jim found her behavior to be deeply inappropriate and upsetting. Later, Jim became one of Susie's most vocal critics as she desperately tried to prove her innocence. It was discovered that the women attending the gathering had removed all the furniture and carpeting from the bedroom. Not only were they listening to music and socializing, but the most alarming revelation was that they had repainted the bedroom a different color. Police viewed these actions as obvious attempts to interfere with evidence. Despite these suspicious actions, the blood expert successfully reconstructed the sequence of the incident. It is now clear that the case had nothing to do with Bill's self-harm. Detectives became convinced that Susie was the one who had pulled the trigger. Based on evidence collected on the first day, there appeared to be little doubt remaining. The focus then shifted to the remaining pieces of furniture and the nightgown Susie had been wearing. After thorough analysis, the expert concluded that Bill had been murdered by his wife, who had attacked him in the head while he was asleep. Susie was shocked when accused and immediately sought legal help by hiring a lawyer. The financial difficulties in their family's marriage have been confirmed by multiple sources. Susie said that Bill's unsuccessful attempt to obtain a bank loan led him to harm himself. Bill's family was aware of his dire financial situation, but not everyone believed that Susie was completely innocent. Detectives interviewed a loan officer at the bank who had interacted with Bill. The officer recounted how Bill had visited the bank in a deeply distraught state, even breaking down in tears. Bill reportedly stated that, without approval for a $200,000 loan, he would die. Unfortunately, Bill's financial situation was bleak, and his loan application was rejected. The loan officer had no choice but to turn him down. Numerous witnesses attested to Bill's desperation and emotional turmoil. Despite this evidence of Bill's deteriorating mental health, suspicions about Susie remained strong. Her behavior following her husband's death was widely perceived as celebratory rather than mournful. This interpretation led to widespread public condemnation and further distrust of her character. However, her lawyer firmly maintained her innocence. Bill Mowbray, a businessman, applied for a bank loan to keep his business running and pay off existing debts. However, the bank's refusal devastated him. That evening, he returned home deeply distressed and barely interacted with anyone. Susie did her best to console him, but her efforts did little to ease his despair. In the final days of his life, Bill fell into a severe depression as he desperately searched for a solution to his financial crisis. Later, Susie shared that after this incident, Bill frequently spoke about ending his life. She tried to support him by accompanying him to a psychotherapist. The lawyer worked to find evidence that substantiated Susie's claims, and succeeded. Several of Bill's longtime friends revealed that, approximately a decade before the tragedy, Bill had attempted to end his life. This had occurred in the 1970s, before Susie and Bill married, which explained why Susie had never mentioned it. After meeting Susie, his life seemed to improve, and those close to him believed that his past struggles had been overcome. This information further reinforces the narrative that Bill has a history of self-harm. The defense attorney believed this evidence would strongly support Susie if the case went to trial. He dismissed the notion that Susie was implicated in the crime by the gathering at their house following the tragedy. Furthermore, he argued that the prosecution's case relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be easily challenged. Susie's unusual behavior was not enough to indicate that she might resort to violence. Bill's family, however, argued that Susie's actions demonstrated a complete lack of empathy toward him. Meanwhile, an outraged Jim demanded justice for Bill and insisted that the killer be held responsible. Investigators suspect that someone else may have been involved in the crime and are questioning the circumstances surrounding the incident. Specifically, they were puzzled why Bill chose to end his life while lying next to his wife in bed. Typically, individuals who wish to end their lives tend to prefer doing so in solitude. If Bill were to choose to end his own life, he would have two methods to consider: either keeping a loaded weapon nearby, such as placing it by his bed or under his pillow, or waking up in the middle of the night, retrieving the weapon, and returning to bed before using it. Susie claimed she didn't notice Bill getting up at night, though it's possible she simply didn't wake up. She mentioned that she had once handled her husband's weapon after discovering it under the pillow. She explained that he kept it in the bedroom for self-defense, adding that such behavior was typical among Texans. Detectives, however, questioned why there were no fingerprints on the weapon if Susie had truly picked it up. Susie claimed that Bill regularly cleaned and wiped the weapon, but investigators remained skeptical. They began scrutinizing the dynamics of Susie's and Bill's relationship. During the inquiry, they discovered that she had multiple extramarital affairs during her marriage, and, importantly, Bill was aware of them. After numerous acts of infidelity, she and her children had left him and moved to Austin. However, Bill eventually persuaded her to return, and they resumed living together. Despite this reconciliation, many believed the relationship remained deeply strained. Susie and Bill were preparing for a divorce and discussing how to divide their assets, which created significant tension and might have given her a motive to murder her husband. Susie's behavior following the incident raised further suspicions. After the incident, upon realizing that her husband was seriously injured but still alive, she chose not to call an ambulance, a decision that might have increased his chances of survival. Instead, she called a colleague, Bill Luke Roy. Susie claimed she was confused and unsure of what to do in such a situation, so she sought advice from a family friend. This initially led some to speculate that Luke might have been involved in the crime, though no evidence supported this theory. According to Luke, Susie's voice lacked any signs of panic during their phone call. Nonetheless, Luke advised her to contact emergency services, which Susie did without hesitation after speaking with him. When experts investigated the scene and examined Bill's body, they discovered a bullet wound in his left hand. Strangely, despite the close-range attack, Susie, Bill's wife, was not covered in blood. Forensic experts noted that an attack at point-blank range typically produces small blood droplets. However, Bill's right hand was found neatly tucked beneath the pillow, which makes the possibility of him causing harm to himself in this manner highly unlikely. The prosecution built a strong case with a solid motive: financial gain. Susie, Bill's wife, appeared to benefit greatly from her husband's death, particularly in terms of insurance. Shortly before his death, Bill had made significant changes to his insurance policy. He increased the payout amount to nearly $2 million but removed Susie as a beneficiary. Instead, he designated the payout to his daughter from a previous marriage, Christine. Susie had even contacted the insurance company in advance to confirm the details of the policy. Crucially, these changes to the policy were set to take effect just days after Bill's death. During her call with the insurance company, Susie uncovered crucial information, which indirectly pointed to the possibility of a motive to act quickly. With Bill weighed down by financial troubles, his death could secure the money needed to resolve their outstanding debts. Apparently, Bill had removed Susie from the beneficiary list due to a lack of trust in her and instead sought to provide lifelong financial security for his daughter. This situation raised several troubling implications. Firstly, if Bill had planned his own death, he likely would have waited for the amended insurance policy to officially take effect, which would have occurred in just a few days. Furthermore, as someone knowledgeable in legal and financial matters, he would have been aware of Texas laws regarding voluntary death. Specifically, insurance policies do not pay out compensation to beneficiaries if the insured dies voluntarily within 2 years of the policy's activation. This means all of Bill's intentions to secure his daughter's future were doomed from the outset. Detectives believed that Bill had no intention of ending his life willingly. When he spoke about such matters, it was likely to evoke pity or manipulate others, such as persuading the bank to grant him a loan. However, given the strange circumstances surrounding his death, it seemed he didn't end his life himself, someone might have helped him. Based on circumstantial evidence, Susie was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. At the trial, a key forensic method was used: blood spatter analysis. This technique, first introduced in the 1950s by Herbert MacDonald, played a critical role in providing evidence and substantiating the charges. MacDonald himself testified during Susie's trial, offering essential insights. Blood spatter analysis had been a foundational method in the U.S. justice system and widely accepted for years. However, in 2009, the National Academy of Sciences raised doubts about its reliability, emphasizing that accurate and meaningful use of the analysis requires significant expertise and experience. Evidence in Bill's murder case was analyzed by inexperienced experts, but this oversight was overlooked during the trial. Although blood sample analysis has been heavily criticized, it remains valuable and continues to be used, now exclusively by highly qualified and experienced specialists. In the past, doubts about this method had led to the reconsideration of several convictions. However, by the time of Susie's case, Herbert MacDonald's method was widely accepted and largely unquestioned. During the trial, Susie's ex-husband defended her, stating that he had never observed any signs of aggression throughout their relationship. He also stated that Susie was not even aware of how to use a weapon. Additionally, a family friend named Luke, Bill's business partner and Susie's initial point of contact after the incident, supported her and expressed his belief that Bill may have willingly ended his own life. Luke explained that he had planned to leave the car dealership due to work-related issues, and this decision had deeply affected Bill. In the final days of Bill's life, he reportedly struggled with loneliness. The prosecutor's office persisted in proving its case. To strengthen its argument, it presented the marital bed as evidence during the trial, complete with two mannequins representing Bill and Susie, as well as traces of Bill's blood that were still visible. This allowed the prosecution to vividly illustrate its version of what transpired on that tragic night. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury ultimately convicted Susie of murder, sentencing her on June 5, 1988, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Susie still had a group of supporters who believed in her innocence, including her son, Wade, and her daughter from a previous marriage. Both worked tirelessly to overturn the conviction, firmly convinced that Susie had stood by her husband until the very end and was incapable of violence against him. While Susie served time in prison, Wade enrolled in law school and dedicated himself to meticulously reviewing the case. He searched for errors or misconduct by the prosecution and investigators, hoping to find grounds for an appeal. Wade collaborated closely with his mother's lawyer to challenge the verdict and fight for justice. The case required processing a massive amount of complex information, which made the effort time-consuming. Wade was determined to secure justice as Susie had already spent 8 years in prison. Eventually, Susie's lawyer submitted a critical appeal that could not be dismissed. During the prosecution's case, the blood spatter analysis played a key role, but serious concerns emerged about whether the forensic expert had been qualified to handle this aspect. The expert had examined over 40 stains found on the nightgown. Interestingly, the prosecution's main piece of evidence turned out to be its biggest weakness. The defense disputed the accuracy of the tests conducted on the nightgown, arguing that various substances, not just blood, could cause the fabric to glow. Moreover, the nightgown had never been specifically tested for blood, and since it was no longer available, its credibility as evidence was entirely compromised. The appeal was accepted, leading to a thorough reconsideration of the evidence before the 1990 retrial. The absence of blood spatter on the weapon can be explained as follows. The gunshot to Bill's left arm likely occurred while he was holding the weapon under the pillow, with his left hand positioned on the opposite side of his head. The shot caused an exit wound. Certain actions of the experts during the retrial seemed questionable. For instance, the forensic expert who conducted Bill's autopsy made a key statement. Although he admitted that he could not be absolutely certain Susie had killed Bill, he maintained, perhaps to protect his reputation, that Bill could not have harmed himself without external assistance. Given that only Bill and Susie were in the house, Susie was naturally seen as the prime suspect. Wade's legal studies and collaboration with attorneys proved invaluable. Together, they uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that violated Susie's constitutional right to a fair trial. A major revelation emerged when the prosecution brought in Herbert McDonald to re-examine Susie's nightgown and the prior findings. Contrary to the prosecutor's expectations, McDonald decisively refuted the arguments supporting Susie's guilt. However, rather than sharing McDonald's expert opinion, the prosecution deliberately concealed it and continued relying on the flawed evidence against Susie. Wade played a vital role in the fight for his mother's freedom. He now faced the challenge of presenting his findings to convince the jury. His analysis revealed deception on the prosecution's part, which violated the Brady Rule, a requirement for prosecutors to disclose all evidence that could potentially exonerate the defendant. McDonald's findings were pivotal in exposing this misconduct. Finally, Susie's day in court arrived in January 1998. By then, the once vibrant woman had been deeply affected by her years in prison, reduced to a shadow of her former self. Yet, in her weary eyes, there remained a glimmer of hope. She continued to steadfastly maintain her innocence. Susie's friends, who attended the same unusual gathering where the bedroom was repainted after her husband's death, described the event as an odd prank. They explained that it was initiated by a woman attempting to cover up the unsettling red stains in the room. According to them, Susie was unaware that her actions would later lead to accusations of evidence tampering. Both friends defended her, with one stating that the room had not been cordoned off with police tape and no warning had been issued that the investigation was ongoing. In fact, investigators initially concluded that Bill's death was a result of self-harm and showed little interest in the scene. They had planned to close the case and archive it, allowing Susie to remain in the house without implementing any security measures, such as sealing the room with police tape. The other friend explained that the group merely wanted to help Susie, who hesitated to let her children return to a bedroom stained with blood. Influenced by alcohol, they decided to repaint the room before the kids came home. Neither friend believed that Susie was guilty of any wrongdoing. During the retrial, an unqualified expert who had analyzed Susie's nightgown admitted that his original testimony at her first trial was baseless and lacked scientific foundation. Forensic expert Herbert MacDonald reviewed the flawed methods used in the investigation and expressed disbelief. The stains were measured visually without proper tools, and there was no confirmation that the stains were even blood. As a result, the evidence was deemed unconvincing. Susie's lawyer presented a compelling argument during the trial, which led the jury to reconsider their stance. They began to entertain the possibility that Bill, Susie's husband, had voluntarily chosen to end his own life. Substantial evidence later emerged, outweighing the vague testimonies provided by several of Bill's friends. The defense strategy focused on one key factor underlying the tragedy: Bill's financial difficulties. After his loan application was denied, his business faced imminent collapse, pushing his family close to poverty. To ensure that his daughter from a previous marriage would receive a larger insurance payout, Bill is said to have decided to end his own life. He spent his remaining savings on increasing the life insurance payout for her. Bill's decision not to wait just a few additional days may have been driven by severe depression or a sudden deterioration in his mental health, which could have left him incapable of fully understanding the legal implications. Accounts of Bill's behavior in the days leading up to his death supported this conclusion. The defense attorney believed their case had been effectively argued. However, during the closing arguments, Susie unexpectedly lost control. As the prosecution delivered its final remarks, she screamed that she had not killed her husband and collapsed in tears. This emotional outburst took everyone by surprise. On one hand, the jury recognized the sincerity in Susie's tears and assertions of innocence. On the other hand, her uncontrolled aggression complicated the situation. Deliberations over the verdict lasted for 4 hours of tense uncertainty. Although no definitive resolution was reached regarding Susie's guilt or innocence, she was ultimately acquitted of all charges on January 23, 1998. Despite her acquittal, she continued to face opposition, with critics focusing heavily on her behavior throughout the trial. While Susie's actions were undoubtedly unusual at times, her supporters, including her son and daughter, attributed her behavior to the emotional toll and stress she endured during the ordeal. Her opponents, however, claimed that her outburst during the trial was a calculated attempt to manipulate the jury. In contrast, her lawyer argued that the outburst was unplanned, insisting that such a risky tactic would have been ill-advised, particularly since the defense had already presented substantial evidence that might have backfired with the jury. During subsequent hearings, it was revealed that the nightgown had never been used as evidence. This omission raised concerns among the investigative team, as items of such significance rarely vanish without explanation. Speculation arose that the prosecution, facing heavy criticism for their strategy, may have intentionally disposed of the nightgown to prevent further examination. This theory gained traction as many believed the nightgown might have undermined their case, particularly given the opinion of Herbert MacDonald, whose expertise could have discredited their claims. Faced with mounting challenges, the prosecution seemingly had no viable path to continue their case. Susie Mowbray was acquitted on her 50th birthday, turning the occasion into a celebratory milestone. She expressed her gratitude to her son, Wade, describing it as the best anniversary gift she had ever received. In a 2001 interview, she reflected on her release, noting that others who had been wrongfully convicted alongside her had already been freed for 3 years. Susie had spent nearly a decade in prison and shared her hope that her children would feel proud of their mother. However, not everyone supported the verdict. Bill's first wife and his daughter, Christine, believed the outcome was unjust, remaining convinced that Susie had evaded accountability for murder. After Bill's death, his first wife revealed that Susie had urgently sold off all of his belongings to secure money. This led to a fierce legal battle between Bill's first wife and Susie over his inheritance. Ultimately, no one received the life insurance payout. Susie had once planned to write a book about her struggles, but since 2002, there has been no news about her. During that time, she went to court in an attempt to reclaim Bill's insurance payout, but she ultimately lost the case. Susie's son, Wade, initially pursued a legal career but eventually left the field to provide advice to other clergymen. Interestingly, Susie, who had previously sought public attention and appeared in her husband's advertising campaigns in the 1980s, completely disappeared from public view after her failed attempt to secure the insurance funds. She did not attend the TV show in 2021 that covered her case, though her lawyer did. The lawyer described her situation as a tragedy, emphasizing that the businessman's widow had spent so many years behind bars, which had destroyed her life, while insisting he had always believed in her innocence. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Marty Hill. Marty Hill, 42, lives in a cozy little town called Prairie Village, Kansas, USA. She is energetic, cheerful, and kind. From a young age, she was drawn to fine art, dreaming of becoming an artist or designer. To pursue this dream, she worked hard, completed her studies, and gained the necessary educational background. Eventually, she fulfilled her dream by working in the design studio of a clothing company. At the company, Marty is always highly regarded for his outstanding achievements and reliability. So, when she failed to show up for work on September 8, 2010, without any notice, everyone immediately suspected that something was wrong. No one knew what had happened, and she had not requested any leave. Initially, her colleagues hoped she might just be running late. They tried calling her but received no response and decided to wait a little longer. An important meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Marty's attendance was deemed essential. Her absence worried everyone since she was always responsible and fully aware of the meeting's importance. She is usually deeply involved with the group and consistently reports any issues, so her silence in this case is unusual. Growing increasingly uneasy, one of her friends tried calling her repeatedly, but the calls went unanswered. Overcome with fear, the friend began to break down in tears, sensing deep in her heart that something terrible might have happened to Marty. A friend decided to find out what had happened to Marty. One of her colleagues offered to visit her house and check on her. He arrived at her quiet residential neighborhood at 11:30 a.m. and knocked on her door, but there was no answer. This seemed odd, especially since her car was parked in the driveway, suggesting she should have been home. He walked around the house but saw nothing unusual, although he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The unsettling silence made him uneasy, so he returned to his car. The colleague returned to the office and discussed the situation with the others. They decided it was necessary to call the police to check on Marty. Because Marty had a 15-year-old daughter who was at school at the time, they agreed not to alarm her until they obtained more information about Marty's whereabouts. Eventually, the police were contacted, and the colleague stayed near Marty's driveway, waiting for the police to arrive. The police arrived at the scene within minutes. When the officer knocked on the door, there was no response, and there were no signs of forced entry. Looking through a window, he noticed a woman's purse sitting on the kitchen table, which indicated that Marty should have been inside. Concerned, the officer decided to check the door, suspecting she might be unwell and in need of help. To his surprise, the door was unlocked. The officer entered the house and searched the first and second floors but found nothing out of the ordinary. He then proceeded to check the basement. Using a flashlight, the officer realized there were no lights in the basement. As he descended to the very bottom, he spotted someone lying in a large pool of blood, curled up in a fetal position. The dim light revealed a gruesome scene. The room was splattered with so much blood that it resembled a torture chamber. At first, the police thought the victim was a man due to the large amount of blood, but upon closer inspection, they couldn't even determine the victim's gender. Based on the scene, they concluded that the person was dead. However, to their horror, the victim suddenly turned around and looked directly at them. The police discovered a severe wound on the victim's throat and observed that her face was so swollen, disfigured it resembled a gruesome, bloody mess. Believing the victim was on the verge of death, an officer leaned in and repeatedly asked, "Who did this?" Despite his efforts, the victim struggled to breathe and was unable to speak. Prior to questioning, the officer had already called for medical assistance. Though still alive, the victim was unable to reveal the identity of her attacker. The victim was rushed to the nearest hospital due to her critical condition, which made identifying her difficult. Her injuries were concentrated on her head and face, including multiple skull fractures, facial fractures, a concussion, and cerebral swelling. The wound was particularly devastating, slicing through muscles and vital blood vessels. Medical experts estimated her chances of survival at no more than 20%. Finally, the victim was identified to be Marty Hill, the owner of the home. Against all odds, the doctors managed to save her life. Attention immediately turned to her teenage daughter, Mackenzie, who was contacted right away. Mackenzie was in complete shock and had no idea what had transpired at their home. Upon hearing of the brutal attack, family members rushed to the hospital to be with Marty. The extent of her suffering was unimaginable, and her injuries were so severe that even her own mother didn't recognize her. Unfortunately, the doctors all gave the same grim prognosis regarding her chances of survival. Her condition was serious, but at least it was somewhat manageable. Family members took turns staying by her bedside every day. The situation was so overwhelming that they felt a mix of anger and helplessness. Her son, Stephen, felt the most anger. Living in Texas at the time, he returned home to be with his mother and offer his support. Stephen was the first person to enter the basement where his mother had been found. After the forensic investigator examined the house, they emerged from the basement and strictly prohibited anyone else from entering due to the gruesome nature of the scene. While the relatives grieved, Stephen cleaned up the blood himself. Detectives investigating the tragedy were baffled, unable to determine who could have committed such an act or why. Marty's family and friends were equally perplexed, as no one could imagine her having an enemy capable of such violence. Investigators searched for clues in her personal life, workplace, and relationships with her children but found nothing unusual. The crime was determined to be unrelated to abuse, as Marty's clothes remained intact, a conclusion later confirmed by the Armed Forces analysis. There was no indication of theft, nothing was missing, and the house showed no signs of forced entry. The circumstances of the crime were shrouded in mystery. Even Marty herself was unable to provide any information about the identity of her attacker. The police interviewed Marty's neighbors, but none of them were able to provide any significant information. The only clue reported was a sighting of a red, broken pickup truck near Marty's house at around 8 a.m., driven by a young, light-skinned, short man. This timing aligned with the approximate time of the attack determined by detectives. The officers followed up by visiting the sewing company where Marty worked to interview her colleagues, hoping to identify someone matching the description of the driver. However, this lead turned into another dead end, as none of her co-workers could offer useful information or suggest who might have been driving the pickup truck. Detectives then shifted their focus to Marty's family. They spoke with Marty's mother, Shirley Roth, who provided a potentially valuable lead. Shirley revealed that her daughter had not been romantically involved with anyone since divorcing her ex-husband 7 years earlier. Despite their divorce, they maintained regular contact because they shared custody of their daughter. Shirley explained that, following the divorce, Marty had dedicated herself entirely to her work and children and had shown no interest in dating. In Shirley's opinion, the only person who seemed like a potential suspect was Marty's ex-husband. This lead warranted further investigation, especially since Marty remained unconscious and unable to provide information herself. Detectives continued to speak with family members to identify Marty's ex-husband. Their children were quick to defend their father. Their daughter, Mackenzie, a high school student, took offense at the suggestion that her father could be a suspect. She asserted that her father could not have done such a thing, describing him as calm, non-confrontational, and someone who maintained a good relationship with his ex-wife and children. Their son, Stephen, also rejected the suspicion, stating that his father was incapable of committing the crime. Despite this, detectives could not dismiss the theory and decided to investigate it thoroughly. The police then visited Marty's ex-husband at his home. He was fully cooperative, invited them inside, and answered their questions openly. He appeared deeply affected by the incident, expressing that he still cared for Marty and was distressed by what had happened. He expressed relief that she had survived and shared that he was praying for her recovery. Although there was nothing initially suspicious, the police still needed to verify his alibi. He told them that, on the morning of the attack, he had taken his daughter to school before going to work. To confirm his statement, the police spoke with his daughter, Mackenzie, who was living with her grandmother, while they worked on verifying the details he had provided. A DNA sample was taken from him, though analysis would require time. For Mackenzie, the prohibition against seeing her father created additional hardship, making this a challenging period for everyone involved. The police also collected DNA samples from under Marty's nails, along with hair follicles found on her clothing. After comparing this evidence with the ex-husband's DNA, all suspicions about him were completely dismissed. His DNA did not match, and his alibi was verified. As a result, the ex-husband was officially cleared from the list of suspects, much to Mackenzie's relief. The family was finally able to reconnect and support one another as they waited for Marty to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, Marty's family tried to piece together what had happened and figure out who might have attacked her. Her mother, Shirley, recalled that not long before the incident, the grandmother's house had been broken into and robbed. This raised fears that the entire family could be targeted by a stalker intent on carrying out violent acts. However, the police had no definite answers, leaving the family engulfed in fear and paranoia. They had no clue who the perpetrator could be and clung to hope that Marty would recover and reveal what had truly happened. The family also recalled that, shortly before the attack, a handyman had visited Marty's house to change the locks. This handyman worked for B&J Construction, a company her mother and grandmother had trusted and hired for years. Coincidentally, he was the only unfamiliar person who had interacted with Marty in recent months. This raised suspicions that the handyman, who often did repair work for the family, might be connected to both the robbery and the assault. The police turned their attention to Brian Pennington, the handyman who had regularly visited Marty's house, her mother's house, and her grandmother's house to handle household repairs and maintenance. At the time, Brian was 26 years old, married, and the father of 2 children. He lived about an hour and a half away in a small town called Leeton, Missouri, with a population of around 500. On September 10, 2010, detectives decided to visit Brian's home. When they arrived, they immediately noticed a broken red pickup truck in the driveway, which matched a description provided by neighbors of a suspicious vehicle. However, the truck did not have license plates, so they were unable to confirm the match. Inside the house, they found Brian, who was cooperative and permitted the officers to enter his kitchen. He answered their questions openly. When asked about the truck, Brian explained that he didn't drive it because it had no license plates. He also mentioned that his last visit to Marty's house had been 3 to 4 days before the attack, during which he had checked the basement equipment. Brian didn't contact the police after seeing on the news that Marty had been attacked. He explained that he didn't know anything and couldn't provide any useful information about the case. Brian wasn't very familiar with Marty. Their interactions had been limited to working together on repairing her house. Although he considered her a respectable woman, that was all he could share with the authorities. However, detectives began to question his account. Their suspicions were triggered by the fresh scratches on his face, which might have been caused during a confrontation with Marty. When asked about these marks, he explained that they were caused by a dog that had scratched him while he was playing in the yard the day before the detectives came to visit. He acted fearful when accused of being involved in the crime, insisting that he was incapable of such an act. Brian provided an alibi, prompting investigators to verify his story. When detectives spoke to Brian's wife, Jessica, they noticed her odd behavior from the outset. She appeared hesitant, seemed afraid to disclose the truth, dodged direct questions, and mentioned there had been tension in their relationship lately. Jessica stated that her husband had been at home that morning, sleeping in another room, and added that the last time he had worked at Marty's house was about a month earlier. She also corroborated Brian's claim that the scratches on his face were caused by a dog. However, her demeanor suggested she was not being truthful. Detectives doubted her account, and she was taken to the station for further questioning. Authorities suspected Jessica might either be an accomplice to the crime or trying to shield the killer. Before leaving Brian's house, the police asked him whether they would find anything suspicious if they searched the property. Brian confidently stated that they wouldn't find anything and even agreed to let them look around. However, in the laundry basket, at the very bottom, they discovered a pair of jeans with suspicious stains. Brian explained that the stains weren't blood but merely machine oil left over from working on a pickup truck. He allowed the police to take the jeans for testing and voluntarily provided his DNA samples for comparison. The items were immediately sent to the forensic lab, where tests confirmed the stains were blood, not oil. However, additional time was needed to extract the DNA profile and compare it. While detectives awaited the test results, Marty regained consciousness in the hospital 12 days after the attack. Although she was able to communicate shortly thereafter, her initial days out of unconsciousness were clouded by confusion. During this time, she experienced constant pain and discomfort. It's not surprising that Marty needed to take a large number of medications during her recovery. Her poor health may have stemmed from her reliance on these drugs, in addition to the severe injuries she suffered. Despite the extensive brain damage she endured, her memory remained largely intact. Marty informed the police that Brian Pennington was the one who had attacked her. She described that morning's incident as starting entirely normally. She woke up early, got ready for work, and followed her usual routine. Around 7:30 a.m., she heard a car stop in front of her house but didn't pay it much attention. Soon after, there was a knock at the door. It was Brian, who had worked on her house about a month earlier. Marty found his visit odd from the beginning. It was unplanned and too early in the morning. However, she reassured herself, thinking he might have been working nearby or had forgotten a tool during his last visit. Although she was hesitant to open the door, she ultimately decided to do so. The two had a brief conversation. Brian was polite and friendly, which helped ease her concerns. Brian explained that he had heard Marty was planning to sell her house and wanted to alert her to a problem he had noticed during the previous renovation. He insisted it was important and offered to show her the issue in the basement. Curiosity overcame her, and she agreed to follow him downstairs. She recounted that everything happened very quickly. Initially, they were just walking downstairs, but an unsettling feeling suddenly came over her. Brian grabbed her and pushed her down the stairs, causing her head to hit hard against the concrete floor. Brian violently attacked Marty, choking her until she lost consciousness. Later, Marty explained that her memories of the incident were hazy, as though she were trapped in a fog. She occasionally regained consciousness, only to lose it again shortly afterward. Eventually, a policeman arrived at her home, and she was taken to the hospital. Investigators needed evidence to support Marty's account. Tests were conducted on a pair of jeans found in Brian's laundry basket, which revealed traces of Marty's blood. DNA samples taken from beneath her fingernails also matched his DNA. Law enforcement officers obtained an arrest warrant for Brian and visited his home, but he was not there. The search for him intensified, and soon police in the city discovered a damaged red pickup truck. Jessica was behind the wheel, and Brian was sitting in the passenger seat, visibly disheveled. Authorities charged Brian with attempted murder and robbery, setting bail at $1 million. The news stunned Marty's mother and grandmother, who had been in contact with Brian for years and trusted him as a professional handyman. Brian frequently worked for Marty's family, completing various household repairs. Tragically, it was Marty's mother who had recommended him to her daughter, leaving her with a deep sense of guilt. The family struggled to comprehend this senseless act of aggression. Brian's cruelty seemed inexplicable, and no clear motive emerged. Although he provided no explanation for his actions, experts were left baffled by the sheer brutality of the attack. Doctors were amazed that Marty had survived at all. Brian's violence extended far beyond simply choking Marty into unconsciousness. He threw her down a staircase, causing her to land headfirst on a concrete floor, fracturing her skull. He continued his attack relentlessly, beating her and slashing her throat. Marty struggled to comprehend what she could have done to warrant such a terrible fate. After sustaining severe head injuries, she faced challenges with her balance, although she eventually managed to walk independently. Shortly after emerging from a coma, she developed visual impairments, along with hearing and cognitive difficulties. Her family noticed that Marty seemed like a shadow of her former self, but they remained hopeful for her recovery. At times, she would lapse into long periods of thoughtfulness, which deeply concerned her loved ones, especially her daughter. Doctors refrained from making a definitive prognosis. While acknowledging the challenges Marty faced, they emphasized that her survival against the odds suggested that recovery was possible. After spending about a month in the hospital, Marty was finally discharged. During her recovery period, she became closer to her 16-year-old daughter, Mackenzie, whose birthday occurred while she was still in the hospital. Mackenzie was deeply touched by a card her mother wrote for her, even though the handwriting resembled that of a child. She recognized the long journey ahead and understood her vital role in supporting her mother as she gradually healed. Marty faced significant emotional challenges after the attack, struggling to reconcile how someone she had trusted deeply could turn out to be a vicious criminal capable of unprovoked violence. Seeking solace, she turned to her local church for emotional support. Meanwhile, Marty's family was determined to ensure that Brian faced justice and received a lengthy prison sentence. The prosecutor's office had overwhelming evidence to press charges against him, including physical proof, Marty's detailed account of the attack, scratches on Brian's face, DNA matches, and items stained with blood. The only missing piece was a clear motive. Brian had neither attempted to abuse Marty nor stolen anything from her home. His actions were simply a deliberate and calculated effort to kill her while working in her house. This act of violence was sudden and seemed to lack any apparent provocation. Marty had no prior conflicts with Brian, and relations between him and other women in her family had been peaceful. However, as police investigated Brian's background, they uncovered a troubling history of criminal activity. He had been convicted in 26 separate cases, most of which were related to domestic violence. His ex-wife and former girlfriends had reported him to the police numerous times. Jessica admitted that she had shielded him out of fear of becoming his next target, as his behavior was systematically abusive. Brian frequently threatened her, exhibiting a clear pattern of cruelty. Jessica testified for the prosecution during the trial, stating that Brian was not home on the night of the attack. She explained that he had been away for hours and only returned around noon, after Marty was assaulted. Upon his return, his clothes were covered in blood. When questioned, he claimed it was machine oil but offered no further explanation. Jessica also refuted his claim that the scratches were allegedly caused by the dog, revealing that he had forced her to lie under the threat of being killed. She provided detailed accounts of their married life, describing him as abusive, both physically and emotionally. During the trial, Brian was visibly shocked when Marty appeared alive in court to testify against him. Jessica, his wife, also testified for the prosecution, presenting evidence that contradicted his statements. Moreover, none of Brian's claims were corroborated during the hearings. Jessica submitted cell phone records showing that, at approximately 8 a.m. on the morning of the attack, she had tried to contact Brian. Geolocation data confirmed that he was near Marty's house at the time. As the evidence against Brian continues to build, he has no viable path to acquittal. To avoid a prolonged and traumatic trial, Brian was offered a plea bargain. Although he could have faced up to 40 years in prison, the deal reduced his sentence to 28 years. However, on the day his sentence was to be announced, Brian unexpectedly attempted to withdraw the plea agreement and plead guilty instead. The court rejected his request, citing no valid justification for accepting it. During the final courtroom proceedings, Marty directly asked Brian why he had attacked her and nearly killed her, but he refused to provide a reason or make any closing statements. Marty is still recovering from the devastating attack, which left permanent scars on her face and neck. The injuries have distorted her facial features and affected her mobility. Despite these challenges, Marty remains determined and continues to train rigorously, believing she can regain her former self or even surpass it. In interviews, she often reflects on how someone only 26 years old could commit such a cruel act. Her resilience and self-belief have helped her heal from this violent incident, strengthening her resolve in the process. Marty returned to her routine fairly quickly and has become even more active. She took up kickboxing to learn self-defense, and sports have played a significant role in her recovery. She also created a website aimed at supporting others who have experienced traumatic events, using her personal story to inspire and encourage healing. In addition to these efforts, Marty continues to work as a designer for a clothing company, channeling her creativity into her art as a way to manage anxiety and stress. She credits her daughter, Mackenzie, as the cornerstone of her recovery and is deeply grateful for her unwavering support. Recently, Marty published a book that details the horrific incident that changed her life, with the hope of inspiring others to overcome adversity through resilience. She now actively works as a motivational speaker, meeting with various communities and offering the same support that helped her rebuild her life. As for Brian Pennington, her attacker, he remains in prison and is estranged from his family, including his mother, ex-wife, and children, who have all cut ties. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Clelia Medina. Early in the morning on Sunday, February 17, 2008, a man was walking with his dog when he suddenly noticed that the dog was attracted to something strange on the ground. Looking closely, he realized it was a series of drops forming a path. He began to follow them, moving parallel to the canal, not far from Lambersart, France. The drops continued, leading him to the very shore where he noticed a body half submerged in the water. It was swollen and very pale. The man immediately reported it to the police. In the name of law enforcement, forensic experts began to carefully examine the area and the body itself. However, there was nothing that could help identify the female victim. It was not possible to find a handbag that might have contained documents, a mobile phone, or bank cards. The body was taken for an autopsy, and the police continued to investigate the area around the canal for any clues about the identity of the victim. While the medical examiner was working in his office, detectives checked the databases of missing persons to find anything that could help identify the body. In this area, no recent disappearances had been recorded. When it became obvious that the unidentified victim could not be recognized, forensic scientists began searching the canal bank for clues indicating the identity of the deceased or the perpetrator. In the relatively small area where the body was found, cigarette butts and anything that could contain human DNA were collected. To ensure that nothing was missed, a team of divers was called in to check the bottom of the canal. This decision turned out to be correct. One diver managed to retrieve a car jack from the bottom, found just a meter away from the body. The jack, belonging to a standard set for a wing car, had a serial number indicating it was used in a vehicle produced in 1997. It had been in the water for quite a long time, so traces from its surface could have washed away. However, during the examination, human bloodstains were found. They continued to collect data. Initially, it was believed that the victim had been strangled, as characteristic marks remained on her neck. However, the forensic expert concluded that the cause of death was multiple strong blows to the head with a blunt object. The location and shape of the marks resembled those made by a car jack. There were suggestions that the girl could have died in a road accident, but the longer they attempted to prove this, the less plausible the theory seemed. It was soon decided to abandon this idea. It clearly indicated a methodical beating after which the body was simply thrown into the water. A toxicological examination showed that the victim was either intoxicated from alcohol or under the influence of prohibited substances. The deceased was fully dressed, and no signs of abuse were found. At the same time, there were no marks on her hands that would indicate she had fought for her life. The attack had likely come as a surprise to her, and she was unable to defend herself. According to the forensic expert, she died around 5 a.m. The police had only one clue that could help solve the mystery of her identity: a small stamp on her palm that had miraculously not washed away in the water. Such stamps are given to club visitors at the entrance, allowing security to recognize them without the need to check passes or flyers. Typically, these stamps are unique to each establishment and are not replicated. It was quickly discovered that the victim had visited the Buccaneer Club located nearby shortly before her death. Detectives arrived at the club, immediately spoke with the administration and employees, providing them with a description of the deceased. Two young men recognized the girl because she occasionally attended the disco, but no one knew her name. The detectives managed to access the recordings from the CCTV cameras. Thanks to that, the victim was identified. She had arrived at the club the day before she was found in the canal, apparently leaving Buccaneer around 3 a.m. and being killed by 5 a.m. What happened to her between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. remained unknown. The police spoke to regular patrons and staff in the hope that someone recognized her from the CCTV footage, but no valuable clues about her identity emerged. So far, no missing persons reports had been filed. The police were left with only one option to identify the deceased: to hold a press conference and appeal to the public through the media. Detectives provided a detailed description of the victim and showed footage from the club's CCTV cameras. Within a few hours, a woman admitting that she was the mother of 18-year-old Clelia Medina. She reported that her daughter had gone to the club about a day before these events and had not returned or been in touch. She immediately became concerned. Relatives and friends had no idea where Clelia might have spent the night. No one had seen Clelia after visiting the club, which caused anxiety and prompted her mother to search for her. Approximately 36 hours had passed when she managed to contact the local police station in Lille, but received the standard excuse that law enforcement officers did not want to waste time looking for a girl who had simply gone on a spree after the club and was likely spending time with friends or a boyfriend. When she saw a news program about the police announcing the discovery of a body and the terrible circumstances surrounding the tragedy, she initially tried to dismiss any bad thoughts about it possibly being her daughter. However, the worry persisted. She literally felt that something bad had happened to her daughter and feared that it was Clelia's body that had been found in the canal. She acted extremely worried and was very agitated, providing somewhat confused information due to her emotional state. Therefore, the police decided to verify the information with Clelia's cousin, who had been with Clelia that evening. The young man confirmed some of the details provided by Clelia's mother. He helped to clarify valuable information such as the clothing and piercing locations that Clelia had. The victim's identity was almost completely matched. Clelia's mother was notified of the coincidence and was invited to identify the body. All doubts were finally dispelled. The mother was shocked by her daughter's tragic death, and she immediately began to cry. She struggled to understand who could have done this, as her daughter was an ordinary girl who did not associate with problematic people. According to her cousin, they had planned to go to Buccaneer Club together, the seal of which was found on her hand. He described his relationship with Clelia as very friendly and warm. They communicated well, supported each other. That evening, everyone was in good spirits. From the very beginning, Clelia's mother had been worried about her daughter attending the party. She felt strongly that Clelia should not go. To calm her mother, Clelia explained that they would not be walking home alone and that everything would be fine. Despite the fact that her cousin took her to the club, he did not intend to stay there long. Clelia managed to reassure her mother by telling her that her ex-boyfriend, 19-year-old Julian Saoli, was supposed to drive her home. The whole family knew him well and trusted him. Julian Saoli and Clelia had been in a relationship for about a year, which had ended a couple of months before Clelia's death. As Clelia's mother noted, even after the breakup, they continued to communicate as friends. Law enforcement officers decided to check the records of telephone conversations, which verified that Clelia had indeed called her ex-boyfriend when she left the club. However, the police did not have time to visit his home, as he came to the station on his own initiative to talk to the investigators. Julian was eager to help because he was worried about what had happened. In his statement, he emphasized that Clelia had contacted him after he left the cinema. He promptly went to the club, where he picked her up in his car in the parking lot. They spent some time together at his house, but at about 4:30 in the morning, Clelia headed home. Julian believed that she could have been attacked during this time. The police immediately questioned why he did not drive Clelia home at such a late hour. He explained that it was only a short walk left to get home, as the houses were located close together. It was already getting light, he was very tired and drunk, so cannot take her home. Clelia herself did not want to impose on anyone and was not afraid for her safety. Unfortunately, Julian simply went to bed and turned off his mobile phone to avoid being disturbed. Until he woke up, he could not reach Clelia but did not think much of it, believing that she could be spending time with someone new, as there was no romantic relationship between them anymore. However, upon learning about the tragedy in the Medina family, Julian felt compelled to help with the investigation, so provided his testimony. The detectives, however, immediately suspected that he might not just want to help. Such behavior is often seen in murderers attempting to divert suspicion from themselves. Thus, they decided not to let him leave too quickly, hoping he would either incriminate himself or provide genuine assistance in the investigation. Suspicion grew stronger as Julian reacted very calmly to the details of the crime. He did not show any emotions when looking at the disfigured image, and he appeared neither upset nor shocked. His lack of reaction to the details of his ex-girlfriend's death, combined with the fact that he was the last person to see her, made him a person of interest to the detectives. It is known that in such cases, exes are often involved, who kill out of jealousy, resentment, or revenge. To establish or refute this, the investigators asked Julian to show them his car. The detective specifically did not mention the jack that had been found in the canal. He agreed to this request without hesitation. According to his confession, he arrived at the police station in the same car in which he had driven Clelia from the club to his home. The policeman went out into the street with him, and in the parking lot, they found a notch indicating the year of manufacture of the car matched the jack. As soon as the door was opened, they felt a very strong smell of cleaning products. The interior was excessively clean for a young guy. It seemed that a very thorough cleaning had been carried out recently. Nevertheless, Julian immediately justified himself by saying that he had bought a new car only 10 days prior, and the previous owner had cleaned it well before selling it. The police were most interested in the possibility of blood being present. Perhaps Julian could have attacked Clelia in his car or transported the body after the attack. When the mat in the trunk was lifted, they found several suspicious dark red drops that were collected for further analysis. However, none of these stains belonged to Clelia. Nevertheless, Julian continued to be considered the main suspect. It was believed that this was an attack based on passion, so the killer must have known the victim well. Furthermore, the make of the car matched the jack was found at the bottom of the canal. Julian seemed ideal as a suspect based on all the criteria. After, they found one valuable clue, a blood stain on one of Julian's sneakers. After examination, it was possible to prove that the blood belonged to Clelia, but it was not possible to date it with precision. Julian insisted that the stain appeared by chance when Clelia had a nosebleed about a month before the tragedy. However, his words could not be confirmed or refuted, so this evidence turned out to be indirect. Even Clelia's family was sure that Julian could not have done this. He had always been a very nice guy. Clelia's mother believed wholeheartedly that he was not capable of murder. She commented that Clelia was almost crazy about Julian based on his appearance. He was very kind, loving, and gave Clelia many gifts. However, their relationship was not entirely smooth. They often argued. Julian as an accomplished young man for his age. He grew up in a strict but loving family in Lille, France. From an early age, he was interested in sports, especially football, which he played with his father. He was not prone to violence and avoided fights, despite being in perfect shape. However, he was forced to drop out of school because of football, wanting to build a sports career, and simply chose training over textbooks. His parents supported their son's decision, especially since he was mature enough for his age. At the same time, they described him as charming but very jealous. They mentioned that he could become upset over a random photo of a stranger on the internet that Clelia was looking at. As their relationship progressed, Julian became more and more jealous. Due to such tumultuous dynamics, they eventually broke up. Despite the tensions, they continued to maintain friendly relations, and everything seemed normal. Except for the circumstantial evidence against Julian, there was no concrete proof. He was released pending further investigation. Then, Julian was arrested and charged with Clelia's murder. He spent about a year in prison, but his lawyer managed to get him released before his trial. Julian repeatedly appealed, claiming there was insufficient evidence to convict him, and was released on bail. However, this lasted until 2011, when his formal trial began. A rather controversial trial lay ahead. From the very beginning, the situation was tense, partly because Clelia's family had changed their opinion about Julian over the lengthy investigation period. They became convinced, based on several dubious facts, that the deceased's ex-boyfriend was indeed a criminal. Clelia's family now demanded punishment for the supposed killer. At this stage, it was necessary to assess the mental health of the suspect. In June 2008, Julian was visited by an expert psychiatrist, who noted no deviations. Julian willingly made contact and described in detail the events related to Clelia. He admitted that there had indeed been several conflicts which ended in slaps to the face. Although he did not think this was normal, he justified himself, citing jealousy regarding Clelia and claiming that she had stolen from him multiple times. After the examination, the specialist concluded that Julian was completely in his right mind and capable of appearing in court. Tension was literally in the air. The defense team escalated the situation to the point where a fight broke out right in the courtroom. Several people were slightly injured, so the trial was postponed because of this unpleasant incident and the subsequent bureaucratic red tape. Everything was delayed for another year until 2012. From February 2009 until the start of the trial in June 2012, Julian lived with his paternal aunts near Paris. She immediately noticed how angry he was. At first, they thought it was connected to the slander against him. However, his discontent grew as the trial approached. Meanwhile, the Medina family accused Julian's lawyer of unnecessarily dragging out the proceedings, which only heightened tensions. The first witnesses began to speak at the meetings. There was a mutual friend of Clelia and Julian who recalled that all three of them had once been driving in a car together after their romantic relationship had ended. Julian had even started dating a new girl, who happened to be one of Clelia's close friends. This situation made she very upset and jealous. Despite their breakup, a conflict ensued between them, which even escalated to physical confrontation. They exchanged blows. At one point, Clelia even attempted to jump out of the moving car, but Julian managed to pull her back inside. By the time the car reached her friend's house, Clelia finally exited and continued yelling at Julian from the street. He tried to calm her down, but she simply waved her hand dismissively and left the scene. This friend was convinced this was not an isolated incident, as outbursts of jealousy and aggression were repeated throughout their relationship. In addition to this event, Clelia's parents recalled several instances during family vacations with Julian where he lost control. They once caught him walking around the apartment with a weapon. However, he had managed to convince Clelia's relatives that it was just a failed joke. They now understood the situation was much more serious. From the very beginning, Clelia had been in great danger. Another friend of Julian recounted an incident where, in a fit of rage, he began to choke one of his girlfriends. The once pleasant, sociable, and good-natured Julian was now portrayed as a monster capable of losing control at any moment. So, the change in the Medina family's attitude toward him did not seem strange. Julian had lied about the time. He told the police that Clelia left his house at 4:30 a.m. Detectives managed to track their mobile phones and prove that they were still together at 5 a.m., which is when Clelia was believed to have died. Subsequently, Clelia's phone unexpectedly turned off at 5:10 a.m. Previously, during an interrogation, Julian said that attempted to contact Clelia again but could not get a response. Detectives believed the call to his ex-girlfriend was made intentionally to create an alibi. Shortly thereafter, Julian's phone also turned off for several hours. Investigators suspected he deliberately turned off his devices to avoid being tracked. Despite all the circumstantial evidence against him, Julian continued to insist on his innocence. His lawyer argued that none of this evidence proved his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Throughout the investigation, detectives tried to extract a confession from Julian, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence. The pressure from authorities led him to feel embittered. He claimed that the persecution caused him to face difficulties in real life and to suffer from insults, unfounded accusations. Phone records revealed something intriguing. Julian's new girlfriend also tried to contact Clelia shortly before the murder. At first, she did not disclose any details as to why she tried to contact Clelia at all. However, in 2011, the girl spoke to detectives and made a rather dubious statement. According to her, she felt guilty that Clelia was dead. The reason for her fears stemmed from the fact that, as a close friend of Clelia, she was dating Julian. This clearly caused great discontent for his ex-girlfriend, who took every opportunity to contact him. On that fateful night, Julian's new girlfriend decided to act on her feelings. She did not like Clelia as such attention directed at the guy. She believed that this was the impetus for another conflict between the exes, which ended tragically. When the police received this statement, they were puzzled and decided to explore this new details. The application ended up at the station, and detectives tried to find out if it was possible that she was an accomplice. They insisted that Julian's new girlfriend may have unintentionally provoked the attack but did not pursue such a goal intentionally. According to her, she had been afraid to admit it because she feared her boyfriend's reaction. The neck of the deceased showed clear signs of strangulation, as if her throat had been squeezed with bare hands. Apparently, the victim could not have been killed in this way, so the criminal used a metal jack from the car. Although it was inconvenient, it quickly became the instrument that ended the innocent girl's life. The killer inflicted a large number of blows to her head and face, which proved fatal. The degree of cruelty was astounding. He broke her facial bones. The prosecutor addressed the jury, stating that leaving such a dangerous person at large was a crime. Despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence, the prosecution managed to prove the defendant's guilt. The prosecution's witnesses appeared scared as they recounted their experiences with the real Julian. The jury found Julian salely guilty of premeditated murder. As he left the courtroom, he turned to the victim's family and said something that sounded like a threat. From the very moment Julian found himself behind bars, he began writing endless appeals to challenge the sentence, insisting that he was a victim of bias and incompetence. Probably feeling his helplessness and unbearable situation, he even insulted one of the judges in writing, subsequently refusing to retract his comments, insisting he was a victim of governmental arbitrariness. However, all his requests were rejected. While in prison, he was involved in another incident related to his inability to control his aggression. Using a homemade sharpener, he threatened to kill one of the prison guards, whom he took hostage for several minutes. Julian was eventually overpowered and neutralized. Now, he remains behind bars. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Judy Southern. Sometimes, from the very beginning of an investigation, everything seems to work out. The Supreme Court might directly point to a criminal, but practice shows that they are not always correct. While they tried to connect one person to the crime, the real culprit was walking free. Judy lived in Manhattan, New York, USA. She was a young woman who worked part-time at the post office. She always focused more on family and children than on career success. However, she wanted to get an education. Therefore, after graduating from high school, she entered college and successfully graduated. During this period, she met Alan Southern. They began a relationship and then got married. Judy and Alan lived together for more than 6 years. They raised a child together. From the outside, it seemed that everything was fine in their family, until one day that destroyed the entire family idyll. On June 7, 2000, Judy was in a good mood as she went to work in the morning, delivering mail around the area. At about 3:30 p.m., she returned home and, as always, found no one there yet. Judy arrived first and was getting ready for her husband to return from work. She had a 5-year-old son who was visiting his grandparents at that time. The boy was supposed to return in the evening. Once inside, Judy immediately noticed a strange mess on the kitchen table and found a suspicious note. She remembered that no one was there when she left for work. No one from the household could have come and left a message. Her husband was at work and never showed up during the day. Judy didn't have time to figure it all out, began to read the note, which turned out to have quite disturbing content. While she scanned the piece of paper, a stranger came out of a dark room and headed towards her, weapon at the ready. Without warning, he attacked her twice. The first bullet missed, but the second hit Judy in the lower abdomen. She fell to the floor and screamed in pain, losing consciousness. When she came to her senses, the attacker was nowhere to be seen. Judy barely reached the phone and tried to call her husband for help. But the phone was not working. She wanted to get to her mobile phone but could not remember where she left it. Fearing that the stranger might still be nearby, Judy crawled to the front door and carefully opened it. She stood up, leaning against the wall, left the house. Judy tried to attract the attention of others to scare off the criminal. She was bleeding and managed to walk only a couple of meters before she fell down exhausted. She knew her husband would be finishing work soon and would be near the house. That is exactly what happened. A few minutes later, he drove up in his car and immediately noticed his wife lying on the ground near the house. Judy was covered in blood but still alive. Alan picked her up and placed her in the back seat of the car. Judy was weak but tried to tell him about the attack. She pointed to the courtyard, but her husband still didn't understand what she wanted. There was no time to figure it out. Alan realized his wife's condition could be critical. Driving towards the hospital, Alan dialed 911, informed them that he had found his wife wounded near their house and was heading to the hospital. He asked them to meet them on the way. Judy was still conscious, said that a man had attacked her. She mentioned the name like Barry several times, claiming he had set up an ambush. By the time Judy arrived at the hospital, she had already lost consciousness. Doctors urgently took her to the operating room, but she died right on the table before receiving help. Her twin sister, Trudy Smith, arrived at the medical center a few minutes later. Alan informed her about the attack. She hurried because she wanted to support her sister. However, she doesn't have enough time. When Trudy received the tragic news of her sister's death, she approached Alan and accused him of what had happened. Alan seemed embarrassed. Trudy vowed to bring him to justice. The police immediately spoke to Alan, who became the main suspect. Because, typically, the closest people are involved in such cases. From the very beginning, Alan referenced Judy's own words about the shooting and the ambush organized by a certain Barry. The problem was that he did not know a single person among her acquaintances by that name. Trudy also could not recall anyone by that name. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the crime scene and managed to find a considerable amount of evidence confirming that someone had indeed set up an ambush there and spent a significant amount of time in the house waiting for the victim. Such persistence seemed to indicate hatred, anger, and a personal motive. This only confirmed to the detectives that the criminal should be sought among the victim's immediate surroundings. Nothing was stolen from the house, so the robbery theory was immediately excluded. Mysterious Barry had taken a shower, played video games, and even found an adult toy belonging to Judy. It is not known what he did with it or why he left it in a prominent place in the bedroom. It became why Judy could not call from home for help. It was impossible because the killer had cut the phone line. He clearly wanted to deprive the victim of any chance to survive, and it worked. Doctors were sure that with timely assistance, she could have been saved. Despite the fact that the shot did not kill her immediately and she was able to leave the house, there was no one to help her. Unfortunately, she had to wait for Alan to arrive for some time, during which she lost a lot of blood. The detectives discovered traces of Alan, her husband. He continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the ambush. There were cigarette butts lying everywhere in the house, suggesting that the killer had smoked more than a pack of cigarettes while waiting for Judy. During the investigation, it turned out that neither the victim herself nor her husband smoked that brand of cigarettes, although this was not strong evidence of his innocence. This became the first piece of evidence in favor of Alan's alibi. It was strange that the criminal had entered the house without breaking in. Alan believed that all the windows and doors should have been closed before he left for work, but the shooter could have escaped through the window, which was wide open. During the searches, Alan remembered that his wife sometimes left the kitchen window slightly open to air out the house. This change in testimony was perceived as a very alarming sign. Spent cartridges were found at the scene of the crime. The first bullet hit a wooden wall. Flax was collected for further examination, and the police tried their best to find the weapon, but it was all in vain. Now, locating it had become a priority. It was believed that Allen managed to dispose of the gun, and naturally, he did not confess to this. Everything seemed to be against Allen. He was the first to report the incident and had spent the last minutes of Judy's life with her. His entire car was covered in blood, as were his hands and clothes. When Allen's office was searched, even more suspicious evidence was found. A special device for recording calls was installed on the family's home phone. Thanks to it, Allen could listen to their conversations while at work, checking his suspicions. This immediately drew the attention of the authorities to Allen. This became a reason to increase pressure on him. The most curious piece of evidence was a note found at the scene, which appeared to be a suicide note, but not written by Judy or her husband. A new name also surfaced in this case, Jonathan. On the other hand, Allen and Judy had serious problems, which offered more reasons to commit a crime. The recordings of telephone conversations were linked to his attempts to catch his wife in infidelity. He planned to use all of this to gain an advantage in court during their pending divorce. As it turned out, both were unfaithful in their marriage. Allen had already had 2 mistresses, which Judy knew about. These affairs significantly contributed to the collapse of their marriage. At the time of the attack, Judy also had a lover. They contacted him, but the man's name was not Jonathan, and he did not appear to look like a killer from the beginning. All suspicions were removed when he provided a reliable alibi. Just 2 days before her death, Judy had called and complained about problems in the marriage, mentioning that they were even sleeping in different rooms, that for over a month, nothing had kept them together except for their 5-year-old son, Jacob. Judy had long wanted to file for divorce but saw how well her child was with his father and did not want to ruin that bond. Allen truly played a significant role in Jacob's life. However, this no longer mattered against the backdrop of constant quarrels. Judy could no longer tolerate the conflicts and was planning to file for divorce. It is obvious that this gave Allen more reasons for anger. He could have been jealous of her, fearing that he would lose his son or be forced to share custody or pay alimony. Trudy confirmed that they indeed had disputes about their child, and both wanted to obtain custody rights, making the divorce process expectedly difficult. Trudy, too, had reason to confront Allen with accusations right in the medical center. However, the most compelling and disturbing arguments for the investigation came from Judy's friends. Everyone knew that Judy had serious marital problems, but the situation was worse than it seemed. Judy had repeatedly stated that if something happened to her, Allen would definitely be guilty. The possibility of financial motives for the crime also emerged. As their relationship began to crumble, Allen could solve all his problems at once and gain some benefit. This turned out to be true because a life insurance policy for Judy was found during the investigation, with her husband and son as the beneficiaries. Of course, Allen denied everything. He was interrogated for hours, but he insisted that under no circumstances would he kill the mother of his child. He claimed that he loved his son too much to deprive him of the most valuable person in his son's life. According to the investigation, there was not enough evidence to bring charges. More material evidence was needed. At a minimum, it was necessary to wait for the results of all the examinations. Contrary to the detectives' expectations, doubts about the correctness of the choice of the main suspect arose with the first reports. The note found in the courtyard of the Southern house, identified as a suicide note, was signed by a certain Jonathan. However, the handwriting was not very legible, and the note itself was slightly contaminated with the blood of Judy. Complicating matters, it was clear that the note was addressed to a woman named Melanie and the letter was addressed to my wife, Melanie. At first, this confusion deepened because Melanie Southern did not exist, but there were other details in the letter, including an address that matched with Melanie Binney. This young woman lived at the location indicated in the note. She had a daughter and a husband named Jonathan Binney. The Binney family home was located approximately 5 kilometers from the ambush site where Judy was found. When the police checked Jonathan Binney in their database, it turned out that he fit the profile of the killer, as he had previously encountered problems with the law. Until recently, Jonathan had committed only minor offenses, but he was now under investigation for something far more serious. Shortly before Judy's death, he had abused his 3-month-old daughter. Initially, detectives believed that this note could have been written by Alan to mislead them and remove suspicion from himself. However, this clue needed proper analysis. In the suicide letter, Jonathan indicated that he wanted to leave this life voluntarily because he could not imagine being imprisoned for abusing a child. This all appeared suspicious when the detectives arrived at his house, where they found only his wife, Melanie. She admitted that he had not lived there since her statement about the child abuse case. Melanie was very angry with Jonathan. When she found out what happened to the Southern family, she was shocked because, in her opinion, Jonathan did not look like a killer, although she was no longer sure of anything. She was amazed at how close she had let a true madman, capable of such atrocities, into her life. She told the police where Jonathan could be, and the detectives arrived at the specified address. But even there, the suspect could not be found. Investigators contacted his close friends, but they also did not know where he could be. In the media, an alert was issued that a dangerous criminal was on the run, and they believed he could not have gone far. Additionally, considering the suicide note, they expected to find his lifeless body sooner. Tracking him down, the police used K-9 units with specially trained dogs and aerial support from police helicopters. The search took nearly a day until finally the dogs led the police to the basement of a house. There, Jonathan was found lying on the floor, shirtless, with 6 nicotine patches stuck to his chest. He was alive. The man told the police that he had attempted to take his own life by overdosing on nicotine. This was probably meant to convince everyone that he felt remorseful. Jonathan did not resist when he was arrested. He even seemed a little glad that it was all finally over. At the time of the crime, Jonathan Binney was 26 years old. His behavior raised doubts about his mental stability. Some suspected he might have mental issues. However, a psychiatric examination indicated that he was aware of his actions both during and after the crime. This led investigators to suspect that he was merely trying to elicit sympathy with his threats. Melanie provided detectives with writing samples that were analyzed by a handwriting expert. The expert found several significant characteristics that distinguished Jonathan's handwriting. He noted the similarity in the spelling of the lowercase g and f in the suicide note and in the samples. According to the analysis, there was almost a 100% probability that this letter was written by Jonathan himself. After this conclusion, the case against Alan began to collapse. Prior to Jonathan's arrest, the police had offered Alan a polygraph test. He agreed and passed with flying colors, which should have strengthened their confidence in his innocence, but they did not want to let him go. Alan was kept under suspicion until Jonathan confessed to attacking Judy, making it clear that Alan had no involvement in the crime. Alan was subsequently released. Another key piece of evidence was the DNA found on the toy in the house. The expert used dozens of filters to collect particles of saliva and skin from the killer, which also matched Jonathan's profile. This linked him to the crime scene. The day before Jonathan was arrested, the police found a 9mm handgun, a significant discovery. Despite a thorough search, they did not find this 9mm handgun registered to Alan. The gun was later confiscated and examined, but ballistics tests showed that it was not the weapon used to kill Judy. However, a dog team found another gun of the appropriate caliber in the woods near the house. Ballistics experts were now able to compare the bullets, cartridges, and guns. Tests were conducted. The markings on the bullets were then compared to objects from the scene of the massacre. The tests allowed investigators to prove that Judy was shot with this pistol. Fingerprints were found on the handle of the pistol, which also led to the arrest of a child abuser, Jonathan. During the search of Jonathan's house, police managed to find 9mm Cobra cartridges for a concealed carry pistol on the body under his clothing, as well as other evidence. All this confirmed that Jonathan was the weapon's owner. Melanie also told the police that he always carried a weapon with him, which he bought for self-defense. However, this had little effect on the situation with Alan. Even after that, he still looked suspicious. There were too many doubts against him because of the existing motive. Therefore, his status changed. It was now believed that he did not kill his wife with his own hands but became the mastermind behind the murder, using Jonathan as the executor. However, he refused to admit he didn't even know Jonathan. The theory that Alan hired Jonathan to kill his wife was also carefully investigated for a long time. The correspondence and calls were analyzed, but no connection leading Judy to Jonathan could be found. It seemed they were not acquainted at all. Against this backdrop, authorities tried to find at least some connection between the criminal and his victim in order to understand the motive for the attack. For a long time, it was thought this would help uncover Alan's involvement in the crime. It seemed suspicious that Judy called out a similar name before her death. Perhaps she really knew him or was trying to say something else, but her husband did not hear. The closest tie the police found was the period when Jonathan worked as a security guard at the library, where Judy occasionally borrowed books. They both had membership cards for the institution and exchanged pleasantries with each other. However, when questioned, the employees of the library could not remember any incidents involving Jonathan. The staff described Jonathan as a somewhat strange young man. While he worked as a security guard, he had no problems in his service record, at least none were known at his workplace. In fact, during this period, Jonathan had only minor offenses. When they questioned him about his job at the library, he could not recall anything that might connect him to Judy. Eventually, the detectives were forced to admit that this murder was a spontaneous act of aggression against an unknown person and a coincidence with Alan. All suspicions against Alan were dismissed. Jonathan was not familiar with Judy Southern. The choice of victim was random. He was merely driving around the city on his moped, looking for a suitable house to ambush. The Southern house seemed ideal to him, primarily because he spotted an open window that allowed for easy entry. Once inside the house, Jonathan clearly envisioned his actions. He had no specific target and was prepared to shoot whomever entered first, aiming to harm an innocent person. He smoked to ease his nerves. When it became he'd have to wait, he played video games and rummaged through the rooms. He never commented on Judy's abandoned adult toy. When Jonathan discovered that Judy had a husband and a 5-year-old son at the time, he claimed he would have shot any of them without discrimination or hesitation, even a child, if they had entered the house. Jonathan also confessed to abusing a 3-month-old child. Due to the ongoing investigation, he later told the authorities that he did not want to go to jail for child abuse, especially considering the familial ties and age of the victim. He was aware of how badly prisoners with such convictions were treated and described in detail the suffering caused by his fear of incarceration. Therefore, he sought a way to remedy the situation. Jonathan decided to go to jail as a murderer. He likely did not realize that he would be tried for both crimes and face 2 sentences, making it impossible to entirely hide his dark past. While in the ambush house, Jonathan altered his plan and decided to take his own life after committing the murder, so he didn't particularly care about leaving evidence. With these thoughts, he even wrote a suicide note. He spent several days behind bars and eventually told the police, without waiting for his lawyer, that he wanted to officially plead guilty to Judy's murder. Jonathan was not planning to deny his guilt regarding the abuse of a 3-month-old. His conscience was eating away at him, and he was ready to talk to detectives again. The entire local community was shocked by what had happened, especially Melanie, who had already suffered greatly. The media eagerly reported that a 3-month-old baby had been abused by her own father. Authorities feared public unrest and felt compelled to provide increased protection for the criminal. When Melanie learned that her husband was willing to kill any person, even a child, to avoid jail time for his shameful crime, she desperately wanted him imprisoned forever, or better yet, sentenced to death, so that this bloody chaos would end as soon as possible. Given the evidence collected, even without a confession, Jonathan Binney faced little chance of receiving a lenient sentence. He was found guilty of murdering Judy Southern and abusing a baby, receiving the highest punishment before being placed on death row. The court's decision elicited strong reactions from both the killer's wife and the family of the deceased, who finally breathed a sigh of relief and continued to raise their children. Jonathan's lawyer fought for a temporary reprieve, even managing to secure one at first, and subsequently signed a written agreement with the authorities stating that he would never again appeal the sentence if the death penalty were commuted to life imprisonment without the chance of parole. This agreement worked. Jonathan Binney is now serving a life sentence and remains behind bars. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Marina Diaz-Vallecillos. Marina Diaz-Vallecillos was born on December 24, 2002, in Granada, Andalusia, Spain. She grew up in Granada with her mother, Teresa Vallecillos, and her 4 sisters, Alba, Andrea, Lucia, and Alejandra. Marina was a sociable girl who enjoyed spending time with her friends. Her sister, Andrea, shared that, after finishing high school, she started working at a pharmacy, although it is unclear how she got the job. Her life took a significant turn at the age of 16. At that time, she met a woman named Yasmina, who was born in the late 1980s and was nearly twice her age. However, Marina's family has been strongly opposed to the relationship from the beginning. Since Marina and Yasmina started dating in 2019, the family has been concerned, and her mother has always lived in a state of insecurity. Teresa reported Yasmina to the police several times, fearing for her daughter's safety. Marina was a gentle, sweet, and calm person, which made her family worry that she might be vulnerable to Yasmina's manipulation. It is unclear whether the police took any action regarding these reports, but it is certain that Marina and Yasmina's relationship persisted, with Yasmina displaying increasingly aggressive behavior. Marina confided all the details of her relationship to her mother and sisters, leaving them deeply worried, as Yasmina was extremely cruel. Yasmina repeatedly cut Marina's hair without any reason and used psychological violence by threatening her and attempting to kick her out of the house. Despite this, Yasmina did not want to end the relationship. Yasmina told Marina that if they ever broke up, she would burn down her house and harm all of Marina's relatives. Such a volatile situation was bound to have dire consequences. According to Marina's cousin, Shumar, the reason Marina never reported Yasmina's abusive behavior was her fear of Yasmina's reaction and potential retaliation. What mattered most to Marina was ensuring the safety of her family and avoiding putting them in danger. Over time, as Yasmina and Marina began living together, the violence escalated, resulting in severe social isolation. By early 2021, after being together for roughly a year and a half, they relocated to an undisclosed location, choosing not to share the address with Marina's family. Teresa, the mother of Marina, shared that they felt powerless because they were unable to locate their daughter or provide support. Conflicting information from acquaintances only complicates the situation further, leaving Teresa uncertain about whether they live in a house or an apartment, or even about the exact area of the city where they are located. Teresa lived in constant fear, unable to contact her daughter and worried something terrible might happen. Tragically, on April 13, 2021, her worst fears came true. At around 3 p.m., Yasmina appeared at the police station in Motril, a city on the Mediterranean coast in Granada, and confessed to the crime. Yasmina told the police that the prior day, while she and Marina were at their rented home, a heated argument broke out between them after breakfast. According to Yasmina, Marina eventually took a knife and threatened her, stating that she could no longer endure their relationship after a year and a half of suffering from both mental and physical abuse. Yasmina claimed she believed Marina would attack her with the knife, prompting her to seize the weapon and strike first. Yasmina explained that Marina had begun screaming and calling for help from the landlord, who happened to be their neighbor. However, before anyone could intervene or understand what was happening, Yasmina threw Marina to the floor and continued stabbing her. After realizing that Marina had died, Yasmina decided not to seek help. Instead, she attempted to cover up the crime by wrapping Marina's body in a sheet, taking a shower, and thoroughly cleaning the entire apartment with cleaning products to erase any evidence. Yasmina disposed of the knife by throwing it into a garbage container along the road leading to the village of Gorgarca, located in the municipality of Vélez de Benadryl. Around 5 p.m., Yasmina went to the port of Motril to meet her friend Antonio Manuel, to whom she confessed the murder. She asked for his assistance in finding a place to bury Marina's body. Consequently, Antonio was accused of being an accessory to the crime due to his involvement in the incident following the murder. Initially, Yasmina insisted that she had sought his help. Later, when Antonio was arrested, Yasmina changed her statement, claiming she had only sought emotional support from him during a difficult time. Following Yasmina's confession, the authorities went to the apartment she shared with Marina, where the crime had taken place. Inside, they found Marina's body wrapped in a blanket. Investigators confirmed Yasmina's account, noting that the apartment had been meticulously cleaned, leaving behind no visible evidence of the crime, apart from a strong smell of cleaning products. Due to challenges in collecting evidence, assistance was requested from a specialized unit of the National Police in Motril, experts in detecting altered crime scene traces. This team arrived in Granada on April 14, 2021, shortly after Marina's remains were transported to the city's Anatomical Institute, where all necessary tests were conducted. The results revealed that Marina had died from 24 stab wounds inflicted by Yasmina using a sharp object. It was also determined that Marina, aged 18, had suffered over 20 blows and other injuries to various parts of her body. On April 16, 4 days after the crime, the Court of First Instance No. 3 in Motril ordered Yasmina to be held in pretrial custody without bail. Despite her lack of prior criminal record, the Supreme Court of Andalusia stated that this decision aimed to protect the investigation and prevent her from fleeing. On the same day, the court decided to temporarily release Antonio Manuel, initially suspected of helping conceal the crime, as a precautionary measure. Because no formal request for his arrest had been made, he was required to report to the authorities every Tuesday, and his passport was confiscated. On the same day, the government of Granada announced that the case would be treated as an instance of domestic violence since Yasmina and Marina had been living together. Although the authorities acted swiftly, the trial did not commence until December 13, 2022. Friends and family of Marina gathered outside the court, shouting and demanding justice for the young woman who had tragically lost her life shortly after she had turned 18. During the trial, Marina's family lawyer, Jesus Huertos, highlighted the brutal nature of Yasmina's actions, detailing the extensive injuries Marina had suffered. He said that Yasmina deserved a life sentence but should still be given the opportunity to rehabilitate. Additionally, Marina's psychologist, who also counseled her mother, Teresa, testified in court. The psychologist revealed that Marina had repeatedly expressed her fear of Yasmina's violent behavior and had stated that she no longer wanted to continue the relationship. Other witnesses provided statements backing this narrative. The prosecution argued that Yasmina had intentionally prolonged Marina's suffering before carrying out the killing, emphasizing the cruelty of the act. However, unlike the family's lawyer, the prosecution did not seek a life sentence. Instead, they recommended a 17-year prison term. The defense attorney representing Yasmina argued that she had been in poor physical and mental condition at the time of the crime. On that day, she had allegedly taken antidepressants while also consuming illegal substances, which impaired her perception of reality. According to the lawyer, Yasmina reacted violently when Marina expressed her desire to leave the house and approached her with a knife. The lawyer asserted that Yasmina was unable to fully comprehend her actions and requested her acquittal during the initial hearing. During the trial, Yasmina expressed remorse, acknowledging the difficulty she had in understanding her actions, while admitting her awareness of the gravity of the crime. She revealed that her decision to surrender to the authorities stemmed from her realization that Marina did not deserve to be buried in an unmarked, improvised grave. Yasmina explained that her intent was not only to ensure Marina received a proper burial but also to take responsibility for her actions. However, she insisted that she never intended to harm her partner, claiming her actions were meant to protect Marina instead. These statements conflicted with testimony from Marina's relatives as well as Yasmina's initial statements. In early March 2023, a provisional court in Granada sentenced Yasmina to 17 years in prison for murder, taking into account mitigating factors such as her relationship with Marina and her voluntary confession. After serving her prison term, she will be subjected to conditional release for 5 years. Additionally, Yasmina must fulfill financial and personal obligations, including paying €75,000 in compensation to Marina's mother and €22,000 to Marina's sisters, Alba, Andrea Lucia, and Alejandra. She is also prohibited from contacting them for 22 years. Regarding Antonio Manuel, who was initially accused of helping to conceal the crime, the prosecutor's office recommended a prison sentence of 15 months. However, due to his cognitive disability, judicial authorities ultimately dropped all charges against him. Marina's family announced plans to appeal the decision, arguing that the punishment was insufficient given the severity of the crime. In public statements, they criticized the lack of support from Spanish legal institutions, particularly since the case was not fully classified as domestic violence. They expressed deep concern about the authorities' stance on this issue, which they deemed highly significant. In their appeal efforts, the prosecution aimed not only to increase Yasmina's sentence but also to establish a precedent for similar cases. Meanwhile, Yasmina's defense announced plans to file an appeal, seeking either a reduction in the charges or a complete reversal of the verdict. In July 2023, the Supreme Court of Andalusia rejected both appeals, upholding the original sentence of 17 years in prison along with the restrictions imposed on Yasmina. The court confirmed that the sentence was appropriate and justified based on the evidence presented during the trial. In press interviews, Teresa, Marina's mother, shared the hardships she and her 4 daughters faced following Marina's tragic death. She also expressed frustration over the authorities' failure to implement adequate protective measures, despite the numerous complaints she had personally filed. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Viviana Hager. Viviana Hager, a 42-year-old chartered accountant, lived with her husband, Jamie Anguita, a builder, and their 2 daughters in a beautiful home in an upscale area of Puerto Varas, Chile. Jamie and Viviana were introduced through relatives. After moving to the area, Jamie initially stayed with a friend close to Viviana's home until she completed her internship. They did not communicate often, but when they finally met in person, Viviana was around 25 years old. Their friends noted that they had different personalities, which further confirmed the idea that opposites attract. Jamie was described by those who knew him as reserved and not very sociable. In contrast, Viviana was lively and outgoing. She grew up with her mother and siblings, as her father tragically died in a car accident caused by intoxication when she was just 1 year old. Viviana's mother chose not to enter another relationship, believing it was not right to bring a new man into their home. She single-handedly raised all her children. The wedding of Jamie and Viviana was grand and held in an elegant banquet hall. Jamie revealed that it had been challenging to win over his future wife. They spent their honeymoon in the Dominican Republic. Shortly after, Viviana became pregnant, but unfortunately, she could not maintain the pregnancy. In 1996, she gave birth to a daughter. They went through another unsuccessful pregnancy, but that did not affect their relationship. Later, they welcomed the birth of their youngest daughter. After the birth of their second daughter, Viviana decided to take a break from her job at a large carbonated drinks company to focus on raising their children. There were many rumors about Jamie and Viviana's relationship after 18 years of marriage. Some claimed they had a perfect relationship, remaining a loving couple and a stable family. Others suggested that their life together was not as ideal as it appeared. On the morning of June 29, 2010, everything seemed normal at first. After breakfast, Jamie took their daughters to a local language school before heading to work at his construction company. However, Viviana did not clean the dishes from breakfast, nor did she open the curtains to let in light, and she skipped several other usual tasks. According to data on the calls made, Viviana called the school where her daughters studied several times, as well as a photo studio, and contacted representatives of a company that cleaned stoves. Jamie also made a series of calls, one of which was quite unusual. He called his wife's phone at 7:48 a.m., and the conversation lasted less than a minute. Later, he stated that he had called his wife to say goodbye that morning, as he had allegedly forgotten to do so before leaving. In the afternoon, at 1:36 p.m., Jamie was at a bank branch when he received a call. According to Jamie, the caller did not introduce himself and said that Jamie should listen to him if Jamie wanted to see his wife again. The man then heard a woman scream, after which the call allegedly ended. Jamie's statement suggested that he perceived it as a prank or scam, which might explain why he didn't act as most men typically would. He didn't try to contact his wife to find out if she was okay. A few hours later, Jamie's eldest daughter called him and said that her mother hadn't picked her up from school. The girl also mentioned that she was planning to walk home. The path from the school to their home ran through safe areas, but for some reason, Jamie asked her to wait for him. Even after that, he still didn't attempt to contact his wife. On his way to school, Jamie stopped at a small police station to report a mysterious call and his concerns about Viviana possibly going missing. Shortly after, he received another call from his youngest daughter, who had made it home and told him that her mother was not there. She went into her parents' bedroom and found a terrible mess on the bed. Several items and documents were taken from her mother Viviana's purse. The girl also noticed that a small safe, some cameras, and jewelry were missing from their home. After speaking with his daughter, Jamie invited Viviana's older sister, Monica, to stay with his youngest daughter. This time, Jamie made no attempt to contact his wife, despite the seriousness of the situation. When he returned home, the police were already there. They believed that Viviana might have been kidnapped. Gradually, more agents gathered at the house, bringing the necessary equipment in case the kidnapper contacted one of the family members to demand a ransom. By evening, law enforcement officers had thoroughly searched the entire house. They also examined nearby plots of land that could have served as escape routes for the attackers and reviewed a list of residents in the area. However, they found nothing suspicious, which led Jamie to ask them to leave. He expressed concern that their presence was frightening his daughters, especially since they had not received any ransom calls during this time. As a result, the authorities began to consider the possibility that Viviana had left home voluntarily. However, the phone calls she made on the day she disappeared suggested otherwise. She had not taken a change of clothes or any important belongings with her. Consequently, law enforcement concluded that she was likely no longer alive. They searched nearby empty houses, sheds, rivers, and reservoirs, but these efforts yielded no new leads or evidence regarding Viviana's whereabouts. Jamie took various steps to locate his wife, publicly offering a generous reward for any information about her. Unfortunately, these efforts proved ineffective as the investigation continued. It became clear that Jamie and Viviana's relationship was not as perfect as it appeared. Jamie openly admitted to having cheated on his wife multiple times, revealing that she was unhappy in their marriage. For several months, Viviana learned about Jamie's actions accidentally. Out of revenge, she began dating another man. At the same time, Viviana was struggling with depression and had sought treatment. A close friend of Viviana, Jan, informed the authorities about Jamie's abusive behavior towards her. When the police questioned Viviana's boyfriend, Edward, they discovered that he was still in a relationship with her. Edward became a suspect in the investigation, primarily due to the lack of other leads. Eventually, the authorities reached out to Jamie again. They informed him that they planned to conduct a new search of his property, this time using specially trained dogs. Jamie was very interested and inquired about the effectiveness of these methods. The police officer explained that the dogs could identify human remains with almost complete certainty, especially if they had prior experience. Noticing Jamie's genuine interest, the officer invited him to the training facility to see the dogs in action, and Jamie gladly accepted the invitation. Soon after, he visited the facility and learned that dogs could detect human remains even if they were buried up to 3 meters deep. Experts stated that the chances of dogs confusing human remains with those of other animals were zero. Just before the planned search at his house involving the dogs, Jamie himself called the police to request their presence. This call occurred on August 9th at 6:55 p.m., 42 days after Viviana's disappearance. Jamie testified that he detected a strong odor coming from a storage room located behind a wall in one of the bedrooms. When he looked into that room, he saw the silhouette of his wife. However, strangely, he did not go in to check if she was there, which is puzzling because he should have felt it necessary to do so. He reported finding his wife at 6:34, yet it took him over 20 minutes to call the authorities. After 15 minutes, the police and forensic experts arrived. They had been instructed not to leave Jamie alone and not to allow him to take any action at the crime scene. Jamie reiterated that he followed the strong odor, which led him to the storage room behind him and his wife Viviana's bedroom wall. However, this raises a perplexing question: how could this hidden room exist? Notably, it was not included in the original house plans he provided. However, the police officers who worked at the house in the early days after Viviana went missing stated that they had checked the place. They affirmed that they had searched it but did not find anything unusual. Several notable discoveries were made. A safe containing over $1 million pesos was missing, a torch similar to the one used by the miners was found, and there was a fragment from an alternate version of the Bible or a similar document. How did these items end up in the storage room? The bedroom itself had also changed. For instance, next to the entrance of the storage room where Viviana's body was found, there appeared to be an altar adorned with various religious symbols. However, this was not the most peculiar discovery. In the initial weeks, law enforcement officers were present at the house but failed to thoroughly investigate one particular room, which was the most likely location for concealing Viviana's body. Despite the police's lack of attention, a puzzling question arises. Why did the strong odor from the decaying remains only become noticeable on the 42nd day? How could no one have detected it earlier? Additionally, why didn't Jamie, who had been sleeping near this room, notice the smell sooner? It is also concerning that Jamie discovered his wife's body just a day before a planned search involving dogs was to take place at the house. This leads to further questions. What if investigators considered the possibility that Viviana chose to end her life voluntarily? During the autopsy, no signs of foul play were found. There was some speculation that she might have ingested a drug previously discovered in the house. However, if that were the case, why did Jamie readily accept the idea of his wife ending her life? Initial forensic examination results showed no signs of external abuse on Viviana. However, the unusual position in which she was found puzzled experts. Viviana was lying down with her hands raised and her legs bent awkwardly. This posture suggested that she had not simply fallen but rather that someone had placed her in that position. Her relatives were dissatisfied with the autopsy findings and struggled to accept the explanation of a voluntary death. They believed that her husband was responsible for her demise. In their quest for justice, Viviana's family hired lawyers and filed a lawsuit against Jamie, who remained notably indifferent, even at Viviana's funeral, where he showed no emotion. In December, a lawyer representing Viviana's family assisted in bringing charges against her husband. He requested that authorities exhume her remains for a second autopsy, which was conducted in March 2012 by the Metropolitan Forensic Medicine Service. This second autopsy revealed that her wrists had been previously tied with a rope that had been removed after her death. Additionally, experts theorized that Viviana's body had remained in the same location for an extended period without any movement. They also noted possible minor injuries to her head and neck, which might have resulted from targeted blows, a fall, or strangulation. Despite these new findings, the exact cause of her death remained undetermined, and experts were still awaiting the results of a toxicological examination. The legal representative for Viviana's family believes that the injuries on her body suggest she may have been strangled. However, Jamie's lawyers argued that the injuries occurred because Viviana, experiencing suffocation from poison, instinctively grabbed her neck before she died. In 2015, a new suspect was introduced to the case, Jose Perez Mencilla. Jose, a man who has a criminal history, was born in Puerto Varas. He could not complete his education and had to leave school in the 5th grade to work as a combine operator harvesting wheat. In 1980, Jose's family sold some land and moved to Puerto Montt. Those who knew them said this family was not very social and often had arguments. As an adult, Jose worked as a carpenter. Eventually, he left Puerto Montt for Ancud, where he married Clara Ruiz, and they had 2 daughters. However, their relationship was tumultuous. Due to financial issues, Jose frequently had to relocate, sometimes disappearing for months and then returning as if nothing had happened. One of his daughters described her father as a cruel man who often abused her, her sister, and their mother. She claimed he frequently confessed to committing crimes. Eventually, the family fell apart. In 1999, Jose's brother got him a job at a construction company partly owned by Jamie. Since then, Jamie tried to keep Jose close by assigning him various tasks, leading to frequent visits to Jamie's home. Law enforcement traced a call that Jamie received on the day Viviana disappeared. The call was made by the man believed to have kidnapped her. This call originated from an internet cafe. Employees at the cafe provided a description of the caller. Authorities quickly concluded that Jose had reached out to Jamie. They arrested him on December 8, 2015, and Jose quickly admitted to the crime, stating that he had killed Viviana at Jamie's request. According to Jose, Jamie had offered him 5 million pesos to make Viviana disappear completely. During the investigation of the case, Jose recounted that on the morning of June 29th, he knocked on the door of Jamie and Viviana's house, and Viviana welcomed him inside because she knew him well. He stated that he had been sent by Jamie to retrieve some tools from the garage. After she led him to the garage, he attacked her, threatened her, and forced her to go upstairs to the storage room, where he killed her. Although most of Jose's testimony seems plausible, there are inconsistencies regarding Viviana's location. He subsequently admitted to stealing some of Viviana's personal items before leaving to call Jamie and fabricate a story about a kidnapping. As a result of this testimony, Viviana's husband, Jamie, was arrested. His oldest daughter, who was studying in Germany at the time, returned home and defended her father. Jamie's defense argued that Viviana had been a victim of a robbery rather than a contracted murder, claiming that Jose's account was fictional. However, the fact that Jose did not take money from the safe undermined the robbery theory. Further investigation revealed that Jose claimed Jamie had paid Jose in haste because he suspected the police were following him. Jamie gave Jose an envelope with only part of the agreed payment. Despite this, Jose did not pursue confrontation, fearing repercussions. By then, over 7 years had passed since Viviana's death, and all involved had been interviewed. The prosecution maintained that it was a contracted murder, while the defense asserted it was merely a robbery. In 2017, the court reached a verdict. Jose Perez Mancilla was sentenced to 10 years in prison for robbery and the murder of Viviana. To everyone's surprise, Jamie was acquitted and released from custody after a lengthy jail term. Justice system representatives indicated that the prosecution lacked solid evidence beyond the testimony of Jose. Had Jamie been found guilty, he would have faced a life sentence as the alleged orchestrator of the crime. After the verdict was reached, Viviana's family told those involved in her death that this was not the court's final decision. Jamie and his daughters filed a lawsuit against the Chilean state, claiming negligence by officials during various stages of the investigation. Additionally, Jamie's representatives criticized the pressure he faced while in detention and sought nearly 1 million Chilean pesos in compensation each year. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery: the case of the Milken family. In the quiet neighborhood near Forbes Lake in Kirkland, Washington, the Milken family exemplified the American dream. Their home was filled with love, laughter, and the joy of a well-established life. The head of the family is Leonid Milken, a sergeant in the Washington National Guard. His journey began in 1989 when he and his family emigrated from Ukraine, seeking a new beginning in the United States. By 2006, Leonid was stationed in Iraq, bravely confronting the challenges of war. Despite the distance, his heart remained with his family, and he eagerly counted down the 6 weeks until he could return home. He was deeply supported and cherished by his wife, Olga. Born on July 22, 1977, Olga is a professional dental assistant in Bellevue. She skillfully balanced her career with raising their 2 young sons, was known by neighbors for her friendly and welcoming nature. Olga and Leonid have 2 sons, Justin, who is 5 years old, and Andrew, who is 3 years old. They bring joy and energy to the home. Justin was very proud of his father and often told people that he was in the military. Both boys were loved very much, and their aunt, who is Olga's younger sister, often showered them with special affection. At 24, Lyubov Botvina, Olga's younger sister, was full of ambition and kindness. She was a sophomore at Seattle Pacific University, studying for a bachelor's degree in foreign languages. She often visited the Milkin family to spend time with her nephews, Andrew and Justin. The Milkin family's journey from Ukraine to the United States was challenging. However, with resilience and a love for life, they managed to rebuild their lives from scratch. They settled in Mill Creek, Washington, and became vital members of the local Russian-Ukrainian community. Their home was a warm refuge filled with love, dreams, and a blend of cultures, a place where their past and future were harmoniously connected. Tragically, on July 17, 2006, their story took a horrific turn when an unimaginable incident shattered their world. After firefighters extinguished the fire and entered the ruins of the house, they discovered the bodies. However, these individuals did not die from the fire. The cause of their deaths remains a mystery. They had been stabbed multiple times, sustaining serious injuries. Someone had done this on purpose to make them suffer. The police quickly identified their main suspect, shocking the entire neighborhood. Connor Skierman, a 24-year-old man who had recently moved across the street from the Milkin family just 2 weeks prior, came under suspicion. Witnesses reported seeing him trespassing on their property while carrying a red gasoline container shortly before the fire broke out. The most disturbing detail was the deep scratches on his face, suggesting he had engaged in a struggle, possibly with someone desperate to escape his actions. Connor was arrested on July 19, just 2 days after the murders. During questioning, he confessed to starting the fire but claimed to have no memory of the murders themselves. He said he passed out from drinking too much alcohol that night, specifically 3 bottles of vodka. He only remembered waking up in the Milkin family's house, surrounded by dead bodies. So who was Connor Skierman? He was born in Bellevue, Washington, and before the tragic incident, he appeared to be an ordinary neighbor. However, beneath this facade lay a criminal with dark intentions. He had kept logs of the Milkin family and plotted their demise. Later investigations revealed CCTV footage of him purchasing items to start a fire. Was this act motivated by hatred or a manifestation of a deeper monstrosity within him? This question would linger in the minds of many for years. Before the murders, Connor had no notable criminal history. His violent actions on July 17, 2006, stunned the community, resulting in his arrest and conviction for killing Olga, her 2 young sons, Justin and Andrew, and Lyubov. Connor acknowledged that he showered in Olga's home, changed into the hospital scrubs he found there, and bought gasoline to intentionally set the house on fire in order to conceal his involvement. However, he consistently denied committing the murders. Instead, he pleaded with the jury to trust him. Despite his claims, the evidence against him was overwhelming. When investigators examined the tragedy within the Milkin family, they meticulously collected the necessary evidence to charge Connor. Although the fire destroyed much at the scene, several key discoveries were still made. Among the burnt debris of the Milkin home, a blood-stained hunting knife was found at the bottom of the stairs. This knife was identified as the weapon used in the attack on Olga, Justin, Andrew, and Lyubov. In the master bedroom, where Olga and Lyubov's bodies were discovered, investigators uncovered clothing soaked in blood. This clothing provided DNA evidence that directly linked Connor to the scene of the crime. Additionally, a flashlight located in the same bedroom suggested that the attack was premeditated. A glove, partially burned in the fire, was found near the victims. This item not only placed Connor at the scene but also showed that he attempted to hide his fingerprints during the brutal attack on the family. Furthermore, security camera footage showed Connor buying gasoline from a nearby station shortly before the fire was reported. This evidence supported the timeline and his intention to destroy evidence by igniting the house. During Connor's arrest, officers noted fresh cuts and scratches on his face and neck, consistent with defensive wounds inflicted by the victims during their struggle, further connecting him to the crime. The conclusion was both horrifying and clear. This was not an accident or a drunken mistake. It was a planned massacre, a cold-blooded crime carried out with brutal intent. 3 years later, Connor Skierman's trial began. Selecting the jury took several weeks because the death penalty was a possibility. The prosecutors claimed that Connor had planned the attack, entering the home armed with the intention to kill. They argued that he had brutally murdered an entire family and then attempted to destroy the evidence by setting fire to the house. Connor's defense team focused on a different angle. They argued that he had been in an alcohol-induced blackout. They brought in addiction specialists, psychiatrists, and toxicologists to support their claim that Connor was too intoxicated to have intended to kill anyone and that he couldn't remember the murders due to his blacked-out state. However, the jury did not find this argument convincing. During the sentencing phase, Connor took the stand to give a 25-minute emotional statement. He pleaded with the jury for mercy, apologized to the Milkin family, and admitted to setting the house on fire, but he did not confess to the murders. He appeared subdued, with a face showing regret and anxiety. As he spoke, his voice trembled, and he frequently wiped away tears with a tissue, struggling to stay composed while also conveying his remorse through his slumped posture. During his speech, Connor avoided discussing the details of the crimes, following legal advice and the rules that allow defendants in death penalty cases to talk without being cross-examined. Instead, he concentrated on expressing his regret and the effect that his potential execution would have on his family. However, his words fell short. As he spoke, the Milkin family remained silent, their faces expressing a mixture of emotions, pain, anger, and perhaps a desire for closure. Olga's husband, Leonid Milkin, who was serving in Iraq when the murders occurred, listened closely, but his feelings were hard to read. The pain he endured was unimaginable, and now he had to confront the man responsible for his loss. Connor's defense attorney, James Conroy, argued that Connor was a troubled man who was struggling with alcoholism. He claimed that during the murder, Connor experienced memory loss due to the effects of alcohol. However, the jury found this explanation unconvincing, which led to the guilty verdicts. In this pivotal moment, Conroy hoped that Connor's display of remorse might influence the jury to show mercy. The prosecution, led by King County Deputy Prosecutor Scott O'Toole, presented a contrasting narrative. They portrayed Connor as a calculated murderer who broke into the Milkin family's home and committed horrific acts. The evidence clearly indicated the premeditated nature of his crime. O'Toole emphasized the profound grief of the Milkin family, particularly the innocence of the young boys, Justin and Andrew, whose lives were tragically taken by Connor. As Connor finished his statement, he stared intently at the jury, his eyes expressing desperation. He stated that people had told him that he was going to die and go to hell, adding that he was already there, his voice choked with emotion. After these final remarks, he returned to his seat, leaving the jury to process the heavy burden of his words and the seriousness of their imminent decision. The courtroom fell silent as the jurors contemplated what they had just heard. The decision ahead of them was significant, balancing justice, societal expectations, and the remnants of mercy that Connor's plea aimed to evoke. Many lives are at stake, not just Connor's, but those of others who will forever be affected by his actions. In the days that followed, the jury would deliberate, each member grappling with their conscience, the law, and the emotional testimonies shared during the trial. Connor's statement added a personal element to their responsibilities, humanizing a man found guilty of horrific crimes. Their verdict would determine not just Connor's future, but would also resonate through the lives of the victims' families, the Ukrainian community, and the larger conversation about justice and redemption. Everyone was focused on the jury, anticipating a verdict that would serve justice for the victims. The prosecution pointed to several factors to underscore the gravity of the charges: the multiple victims, with 4 people killed at the same time, their vulnerability, given the young ages of Justin and Andrew, which highlighted the victims' helplessness, and the attempt to conceal the crime, with arson being seen as part of a plan to destroy evidence and cover up the murder. Connor was found guilty of intentionally setting fire to the Milkin residence after the murders, indicating that the murders were premeditated. The prosecution claimed that the fire was a deliberate action to eliminate evidence and obstruct the investigation. On April 12, 2010, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict: guilty on all charges, which included 4 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree arson. Connor was found guilty of 4 separate counts, each representing a victim: Olga Milkin, Justin Milkin, Andrew Milkin, and Lyubov Botvina. The penalty phase of the trial lasted 2 weeks and was filled with strong emotions. After a day and a half of deliberation, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. On May 5, 2010, Judge Gregory Canova of the Kane County Superior Court officially sentenced Connor to death by lethal injection. As the sentence was announced, Connor allegedly shook his head in disbelief, while Leonid felt a sense of relief that justice had been served. Connor's defense team promptly announced plans to appeal the conviction to the Washington State Supreme Court, citing issues with jury selection and comments made by the prosecution during the trial. Connor's family, who were present at the sentencing, chose not to speak to the media. King County Prosecutor Dan Satterberg addressed reporters at a press conference, stating that the death penalty is the law in the state and is reserved for the worst crimes. Satterberg, who was not in office when the death penalty was sought against Connor, praised the prosecution team for successfully presenting the case to the jury, which he believed made the right decision. He expressed sympathy for the victims, mentioning that they were wonderful people whose American dream had been tragically shattered. In 2018, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional, citing its inconsistent application and potential racial biases. This landmark decision resulted in all death sentences in the state being commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Consequently, Connor's death sentence was changed to life imprisonment without parole. Despite facing significant challenges, the Kirkland community came together to support Leonid Milkin. During this difficult time, he found his neighbors ready to help him fight for his rights and rebuild his home. Local veterans and volunteers led the rebuilding efforts, while companies generously donated materials and labor. Together, they transformed the site of tragedy into a hopeful home, symbolizing resilience in the face of injustice caused by a man who disrupted their lives. Leonid, a sergeant, had come to the United States to provide a better life for his family, but after the tragedy, he was left to rebuild his life on his own. By 2010, 4 years after the murders, he was preparing to move back into his reconstructed home. He viewed it as both a memorial to his lost family and a fresh start for his future. He now lives there, carrying with him the memories of his 2 sons and beloved wife, still questioning why his peaceful life was taken from him. The Milkin family massacre remains one of the most horrific crimes in Washington's history, a tragedy that shattered a family and deeply impacted the community. What do you think? Did justice truly prevail, or did Connor evade the punishment he deserved? Let's discuss. If you're interested in more cases like this, be sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next exploration of true crime's darkest stories.